We're back, everyone! After a long and unexpected vacation, I'm your host, Sean Wilson.
And I'm your host, Matt Ebersol.
And after kicking down one too many doors and trying to get that gag right, we've returned for a third improvised season of Everything is Fine.
Well, I would call it more of a continuation of Season 2, because we really only did 3 episodes.
Correct.
Unless
So
Season 2 is absurdly short.
Why not just say this is 2.5 and then never do the back half?
There you go.
That way everyone will be upset with us.
Welcome to Season 2.5, everybody.
Welcome to Season 2.5. And what do we have in store for you? We have more of our usual brand of idiocy.
Yes, with a bit of a twist today. And we're going to talk about that briefly at the beginning of today's episode. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into it. So, obviously, we took a break.
Did we?
I would think we did. It was kind of an unofficial... It was kind of just Sean and I slowly realizing that this summer was just a summer of insanity and just working constantly, being busy, always being sidetracked. And we just honestly could not find the time to do this show and stay sane within our normal lives. So that's... If you're wondering why we left, it's because we were just really, really busy.
It's a very eloquent way of saying we woke up on a Friday and then realized we had both had work, and then we're just like, oh, season's over, I guess.
Yeah, it looks like we're not doing an episode this week. Yeah, but we got in the 3 episodes we wanted to do. We got in those Marvel episodes for you guys, and I know that those episodes were ones that I, Sean, and a lot of you were looking forward to.
And of course, me and Matt realized how hard it is to talk to a blank wall for an hour.
Yeah, it was hard recording 3 hours apart. And now, if you're wondering, we're in the same room again for the first time since the Q&A back in like May. It's in like 4 months since
we're in a
we've been
new
able to do
studio.
this.
There's lava and toxic waste all over the place.
There's just
we
as
had to
many
fight
posters.
demons to get through the door today.
Just as many posters.
We broke our 9th door. That was what you heard.
Did I mention there's posters?
Yeah, every square inch of the walls are covered in posters.
It's a good time.
So yes, welcome to the second and a half season of this show. Letting that die.
Our glorious return. I think we've gone long enough. We just started our 7th semester of college, our 4th year here at where we're at, and we realized that actually, Fridays are a good day to record because it's our weakest day of the 5-day school schedule, and now we're back, and we're going to be having new episodes every single Sunday, just like before. We're going to be doing this for an indeterminate amount of time until our winter break hits or until we get absurdly busy, because we do also have some commitments coming up.
Or we just forget again.
That's also a point. And Sean and I each have recitals coming up this semester. We're also doing a lot more schoolwork than we normally would. So if we forget one week, we'll let you know, and we apologize in advance. But we're going to try to every single week have something brand new and very exciting for y'all.
Yeah. And speaking of something brand new and exciting for y'all, we're kind of deviating from what we normally do here for this season / semester / indiscriminate amount of time until we finally move on to season 4. So the plan is we looked back on our old recordings before we did this, of course, because to move forward, one must assess everything you did wrong at every step of the way. And after 16 examples of doing something wrong, I'm kidding.
16.
So what we decided to do is we like how we do this show. We're gonna still keep the same ideas and the same themes, but we realized we did a lot of the same stuff every week. It was, here is a topic, here is a summary of the topic, here's why it's good, here's a few opinions that slightly differ from us and or whatever guest we somehow got to appear in a public recording for that week. And then we produced it. And then we sometimes put out something on Instagram because we're both abhorrent with managing our social medias. So we decided to uproot a lot of that and make it show that we're not just doing the same shtick every week. So what we're doing a lot for this semester, especially since we have several events coming up, like holidays and other things like that, we are still going to do pop culture stuff. That's what we specialize in. I don't think we could do this show on anything else. But our goal is... Geology. Astrology? I feel like people would listen to
any kind of ology, really.
Yes.
Herbology.
The plan here is, instead of us presenting a topic, telling you what it is, even though most of you probably know what we're already talking about, and then just kind of going over a summary of its timeline, we're going to do less more here's a show and tell bit, and more of a, hey, we all know what this is, but did you know this about it? Or did you understand this? Or, hey, why did this make me think like that? Or stuff like that. We want to do more like in-depth analyses. We want to bring things to your ears that you might not have known about some of your favorite things. Like, I've always found it enjoyable in the segments where like I covered like some little trivia that like Matt didn't know about stuff. And I was like, hey, what if we just start doing that more? Because like everyone knows about Marvel. We just talked for 12 hours about Marvel. But I guarantee you, like, Matt looked at me when we were doing the recording for the first episode of the Marvel thing. Like, we had the video camera up. And he's like, I didn't know that, like, Marvel pretty much was going to die if, you know, Iron Man didn't work out. And, like, so, like, I was like, oh, like, we need to do that more. We need to tell the crazy stuff, the behind-the-scenes stuff. Or at least explain shit that people don't understand about things that we talk about. So, this is less now show and tell. This is more of, you like this. But did you know? And things like that. So we also have some fun things planned. Like we're going to have, of course, we're going to have guests on the show. Of course, we're going to talk about some topics that people wanted to talk about on the show for a long time. We want to listen a lot more to some viewer suggested ideas. Like some of our greatest ideas have come from people we know that are around the show.
Just listen to the Q&A special. Like that was some of the most fun we've ever had. That whole episode was determined based off what y'all sent us.
Yeah, we didn't like fake any of those questions. We faked one. We faked one question, and that was basically the lead-in for like what we were gonna do next.
Yeah.
But like out of the 30 questions we answered, 29 of them were authentic. So. Yeah, like, apparently people listen to us, and some people like us. So
yeah, so would have thought.
Those people who like us, send us things you want to hear us talk about. And because we're trying to make this new push towards, like, a new style of, like, what we want to bring to the show, really, quite literally, throw any diseased idea at us, and we'll probably put it on our to-do list.
Yeah, and also, if we were to do our old formula again, whereas we pick a movie franchise or a TV show or whatnot, and just talk about it, honestly, we're running out of things that Sean and I are both, A, very passionate about equally, and we can talk about for a very long time. So we need to come up with other things to keep us entertained, and that can also be more broad topics. They don't necessarily need to be, oh, we're only talking about this movie today. It could be a large umbrella topic that we then relate to other things, similarly to what we're going to be talking about today, which we'll get into. Yeah. But as Sean has said, we're still going to have guests. We're still going to have listener suggestions, which we'll be posting on Instagram periodically. Not everything is going to change, but we want to try to keep improving the show. That way, y'all keep listening, and you can find something new and fun to listen to every single week. And
whether that's us explaining something, or giving some behind-the-scenes ideas, or even just, like, giving our advice on some stuff. Because we cover a lot of pop culture, but here's the thing. Like, Matt is a fantastic composer and is very good at, like, music theory, and I write a lot, perhaps too much, in my spare time, because I do a lot of things with, like, a D&D community and Adventurers League, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of notes and storyboard material that I've had to write for that group. We'd also like to maybe do some things where it's like, oh, like, if enough people say, like, oh, how would you go about writing something? Or how would you go about, like, what's your opinions on some musical things and, like, scoring? Or we'd love to do those things as well.
Or if there's a franchise out there that you maybe think didn't have the best movie or season, what would you do differently? How would you rewrite something?
Yeah. How would you fix anything, any old season finale, any old final season? It's not like we're still mad about Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
But yeah. Deal. Our point is, we're doing everything different with still keeping the same charm.
Exactly. And we're going to see some fan-favorite guests come back. I know for a fact.
I still live with Connor, so Connor will be back.
He'll be on eventually.
But yeah. But with kind of, like, all of that out, we kind of wanted to move into an example of, like, more of a broader idea of what we wanted to give. Kind of a little bit of everything we said, both on the, like, what would we do, how would we write this, how would we come up with this, and what's a broader topic to explain, like, oh, like, why do we like the things we like? We recently saw Shang-Chi in theaters, and no, this is not a Shang-Chi episode, as you can probably tell by the title that we're going to put in.
We're not doing another Marvel episode.
Absolutely not. So what we walked away from the theater, and one thing that we kept talking about that, like, was one of the main reasons we liked Shang-Chi was, like, yes, it was a phenomenal film. It was a good Marvel film. Everything was great. We liked the hero. We liked a lot of stuff. But the one thing we liked, and we noticed that was different from, like, old Marvel versus what we're doing now, is we really liked the villain for Shang-Chi. We really liked, and we're not going to say who the villain is because it's only been a week since that movie. So
yeah, we don't want to spoil it.
if you know who it is, you know who it is. If you don't, go watch it. It's great. It's worth your time. But we liked that villain a lot, and we were like, why did we like that villain as opposed to why we didn't like a lot of Marvel's other villains? And then we started talking about why we like villains in general. So yeah, that's today's topic. Like, why do we go to the movies or read a book or play a video game or hear a story? It doesn't have to be movies, because we talk about movies way too much.
That's another thing we need to fix.
We need to stop talking about movies. Start giving us video games or books or, I don't know.
Or TV shows.
Yeah.
TV shows might be the one that we get the most.
TV shows basically for us are just diet movies. So,
yeah, they're longer movies, but in shorter little segments.
Yes. But anyways, we wanted to talk about, because like we consume media at an abnormal rate for human beings. Why do we like the villains and the things we like? What makes us constantly go back? I mean, think about it. You watch, 9 times out of 10, a person sits down and watches, I'm going to pick on Disney. Someone puts on a Disney movie, and what scenes are you most excited for? Are you excited for the love song ballad? Are you excited for like the whole new world sequence where the hero sings about what they really... No! 9 times out of 10, you're here because you want to see a cool villain kick butt. Uh-huh. And why is that? Why do we like those villains? And subsequently, why do we hate the villains that we hate? We all think of a villain you don't like. And I don't mean like you don't like them because you don't agree with their ideas, or no, you watch this and you're just like, damn, this is the worst designed character to oppose X hero ever. Think about that. Why do you not like that villain? Mm-hmm. You can answer that question, but there's reasons why people don't like villains and why people love villains. So the whole point of this episode today is like, oh, we're going to take some great examples in every piece of media. And I said every because we can't just keep talking about movie villains. Yeah. Or movie anything.
There are some TV villains that I want to bring up.
There are book villains. There are video game villains. There are phenomenal... Yeah. I write D&D. I've had to design villains before. So I, like... Because I've written villains and Matt has seen so many villains, we want to give our opinions on like why villains work, what makes a villain compelling, and put our opinions into the public lexicon for you guys to argue with us or agree with us on.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the whole point of like what is... So I guess a great point to start is why is villain? What is villain? If you've ever heard a story before that involved a hero trying to do something or a protagonist trying to do something, there is a chance that there is an antagonistic force that's opposing them. And most of the time, that force is in the form of another person who is just in the hero's way, trying to do something different, have a competing goal. Mm. That's your villain. Yep. Classic example is like go all the way back to fairy tale. Pick a fairy tale. Pick any fairy tale. Pick like Rumpelstiltskin because like that's just one of the ones that came into my mind. That Rumpelstiltskin is the villain of that story. He's just trying to mess with this maid who's like, oh, if you can't guess my name, I'm taking your firstborn son, because that's how fairy tale villains work. And there's a reason like that kind of trickster archetype of villain has succeeded in surviving for hundreds and hundreds of years. Because we like seeing a trickster. We like seeing someone who's going to be played a hero. Or take something else out of the realm of fantasy. Take like the Dark Knight archetype from the Tales of King Arthur. Mm-hmm. Our brave young hero destined to be a king is opposed by this looming figure with a little bit of anonymity to who they are underneath the armor. They're just this imposing force, stronger than the hero, faster than the hero, tougher, will not be put down. Mm-hmm. And they're this hill that the hero has to get over. And that kind of hero archetype has survived for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, look at any grim, opposing, strong, silent type villain that stood in the way of any heroes. Darth Vader is a perfect example. Bane is a perfect example. Pick anyone like that. Mm-hmm. Why do those villains work?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and I want to quickly bring up a quote by, in my opinion, the greatest film critic of all time, Roger Ebert, the late great Roger Ebert. He said, "Each film is only as good as its villain. Since the heroes and gimmicks tend to repeat from film to film, only a great villain can transform a good try into a triumph." And honestly, that's everything. Because, yeah, you're going to get the typical hero's journey and know, young boy or girl or protagonist character wants to do one thing. Well, you're going to get that every time. What stands in the way? That's what takes a good story from a great story, is putting your hero through trials and tribulations that reveal their true character and their true nature. And the only way to do that is through forces of antagonism, driving them to make certain choices. Because when you're protagonist is at a fork in the road, and he needs to make choices that are difficult, and that each one has, there's compelling arguments for both. That's when a story is at its most compelling, when it's keeping you guessing and it's keeping the protagonist on edge. And the only way to do that is to have a villain that is constantly pulling all the strings, constantly doing one thing after another to try to foil our hero's plan or foil our hero's journey. And that's honestly the basis of storytelling, is to just have a compelling battle between two forces trying to compete for one thing. It can be something as big as one ring to rule them all in the Lord of the Rings, or it could be something as tiny as just like, a little argument that then leads to
I want to be
else.
the number one monster on the scare floor.
Exactly. Like it is the foundation of everything, and that's why we all love villains. And some villains we love to hate, some we hate to love. Some we love to love, some we hate to hate. Yeah. There's so many different kinds, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is some of our favorite examples of how to make a good villain and the execution of that, why we love them.
And of course, moments that make those villains immortal in our minds. Like, there are some villains that I'm sure that you're sitting back and you're already thinking of examples of.
Oh, absolutely.
But here's the thing, we all know who Darth Vader is, to go the Star Wars route. We all know who Darth Vader is, but what was the moment that you as our listener thought to yourself, I'm never going to forget who Darth Vader is? Like, I'm not saying, I saw his face enough times on someone's bumper sticker. I'm saying, what point in the Star Wars movie did you realize, oh, shit, this is a villain that I'm never going to forget for the rest of my life? Because anyone who has seen Star Wars knows who Darth Vader is. Even someone who's never seen Star Wars has seen the helmet.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that his image has persisted. For me, the moment I knew that Darth Vader was going to be, the villain that I would always remember in my entire life was when he killed Obi-Wan. As a kid, when I watched them in order, when my dad sat me on the couch, he's like, we're going to watch Star Wars together. I, immediately, I was like, there's no way. 7-year-old me is just Obi-Wan's going to distract him, he's going to go away, and he's going to catch up. No, he just murks him. He, completely destroys him in a duel. Granted, Obi-Wan lets it happen, but, to 7-year-old me, Obi-Wan lost, Darth Vader killed a guy on screen, and he just stepped on the cloak and then started lurching towards the camera until the door was shut. That's an unstoppable force of nature, and here I am, 13 years later, 14 years later, and I still think about that scene, and it's lovely.
I mean, the intro to him, too, is also great, because that's another way to establish a villain, is the intro, when you first see them.
Oh, the intro.
Honestly, most great villains, you only get one shot at a first impression, and most of the great villains in cinematic history, in television history, in video game history, the first time you see them, they're supposed to leave an impact and be like, oh, that guy means business. So when you first meet Vader, for example, he is invading the Rebel cruiser, the Tantive 4, and he chokes out a guy asking for the Death Star plans, is in complete control of the situation, and pretty much arrests Princess Leia immediately. And you've just met him.
He temporarily succeeds.
Yeah, but when he actually you said when he killed Obi-Wan. I actually disagree. Because in the first Star Wars film, Vader really is just this brute force of just antagonism that doesn't really have a lot of development. You just see him as he's the muscle of the Empire. It's really not till Empire that you actually feel afraid of this person on multiple levels. As outside of he's big and strong. No, in Empire, you realize, no, this guy is a conniving machine, and you learn that through multiple actions that he has, especially when he freezes Han and Carbonite, and he captures all of Leia and C-3PO and Chewie and Lando and all them, and then he confronts Luke at the end. That takes him from just a muscular, big, brute force villain into one of the best of all time, that's able to impact the plot on many different ways, and impact our heroes and make them think and make them question their choices and stuff like that. That's why Vader, I think, works. Yeah. Is because he's everything in one. And then, of course, you have the redemption arc of him through 6, and then he ends up being a good guy by the end.
That's also something, a good point to bring up, too, is, another thing about great villains, sometimes they don't have to be the villain the entire time. And there's very, very, very few examples of fantastic redemption arcs in anything.
Yeah.
But there are these wonderful redemption arcs in certain villains where they stop being villains at a certain point. A fantastic example that I want to bring up is Prince Zuko.
Of course.
Prince Zuko, I believe, and I'm pretty sure everyone listening to this, if you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, will agree with me. Prince Zuko is the greatest redemption arc ever in any form of literature or media. I just want to stress to you, like, if you've never seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, stop listening to this.
Go watch it.
Go watch it. Come back.
I had not watched it until around April or May of this year. So about like 5 months ago, I started watching it for the very first time. And it pretty much met / exceeded all my expectations. And even then, going in, I knew it was going to be good because I had not met a single person who didn't like it. So go watch Airbender. And once you do watch it, stay tuned because I guarantee you there's going to be an episode of that coming up on this very show.
Yes. But Zuko's whole point is, yeah, this is spoilers for Avatar, but if you've not seen it, that's your fault. Zuko is the son of basically the Emperor in the Emperor equivalent in Avatar. Ozai. The Fire Lord Ozai, who is in charge of the Fire Nation, who basically 100 years prior to this, his grandfather said, I'm just going to take over the world because firebenders are the best. So this 100 years war happens, and Zuko eventually is born as heir to the throne. His father is a psychopath. Hell-bent on taking over the world and eradicating everyone else.
Not the best dude.
Not the best dude. Zuko is this, as a child, is this kind-hearted, nice kid who just wants to, like, be loved by his mom and impress his dad, and, like, that's it. That's all he wants. And his sister is a grade A sociopath, but, like, in the Fire Nation, that's rewarded because, like, you're going to be a sadistic general. But, Zuko finally earns his father's respect at one point and then immediately throws it in the toilet because he misspeaks and disrespects a general at a war table meeting and is challenged to essentially a one-on-one fight to, like, defend his honor in the ring. He thought he was going to fight the general he outspoke against because he genuinely disagreed with it because the general was like, oh, we're going to just send a bunch of our own men to their deaths so we can press the advantage. And Zuko, thinking about his troops, and was like, no, we need to care about our own men. That was what earned him an ass whooping. So he gets into the ring, and lo and behold, it's his father, the greatest firebender of their time. And he's not going to fight his dad, so he immediately gets his ass kicked, his face burned, is exiled from the Fire Nation, and his only hope of redemption in his mind is finding the Avatar, the one person who can stop the Fire Nation, and bringing him to his dad, and then being let back into the family. And over the course of the show, he starts to realize that that's not what's going to get his honor back. That's what's going to get his honor back is realizing who he is and believing in who he was. Because Zuko, at the heart of his character, is a villain for most of the show. For like half the show, he is this unrelenting, vengeful spirit that's going to track down the gang for any purpose to bring them all in to eliminate the Water Tribe. Especially season 1. He's an angry, angry, angry man. He has some moments of compassion. He has some moments, and he gratefully has his Uncle Iroh, which is the greatest supporting character of all time, to influence him and try and bring him to the light side, metaphorically speaking. But the best part about this is you in the first season think Zuko is this monster. Zuko is this unrelenting agent of the Fire Nation, willing to kill, fight, and maim anyone who is in his way. And halfway through the show, there's these breaking points of where he realizes, oh shit, even if I do this, I'm not going to be respected by my sister. I'm not going to be respected by my father. Nothing's going to change. I'm just going to be used by the Fire Nation if I go back and if I have value to them. If not, I'm still going to be out here exiled with my uncle. And he realizes he can change. He can grow. He can become who he wants to be. And he can realize what's right in this world. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that in the future, but there is this wonderful redemption arc he goes on where he stops being Prince Zuko and starts just being Zuko, starts being this he reaches out to the Avatar, basically apologizes, and then becomes an ally in the end. But here's the thing. You think, oh, the series villain got redeemed. We need a new villain. That's the beauty of Avatar. One thing they do is they don't ever replace Zuko as a villain. No, Azula is... His psychopath sister is an antagonist. His father is an antagonist. The Fire Nation is an antagonist. There's a difference between an antagonist and a villain. One is an antagonist is essentially an idea personified that stands in the protagonist's way. A villain is a character that opposes the protagonist that embodies ideas. It's one embodies the other is the difference.
Interesting way to put it.
And Zuko is a perfect example of not just a redemption arc, but a villain versus an antagonist.
And the thing about Zuko that really works too is like, there are a lot of redemption arcs in film for villains, but a lot of them aren't done well, and that's honestly because when you think of a redemption arc, the one thing you shouldn't think of, but mostly people think of, is a linear path. So, a constant, gradual ascent to eventually being good. That should not be what happens. Because with Zuko, without getting into major spoilers, there are parts in his journey where, like, oh, you think he's going to now finally realize all of his wrongs. Oh, never mind. He's pretty much down in the pits, even deeper than when he was. And it just completely flips everything on its head. That's what I think also works about it. And what didn't work about other villains that tried to do a redemption arc, for example, one from Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister, who our good friend Connor has said was this close to being better than Zuko in terms of a redemption arc.
He's
and
not
then at
wrong
the end,
either.
they screwed it up because they basically just went back on everything that they've been working on for 7.5 seasons for just a quick gotcha moment and have him die with his sister because he never cared about innocent people, apparently. There's a way to do a redemption arc, and in our opinion, Zuko's the best one. You can let us know.
For a villain.
For a villain. You can let us know what your favorites are on Instagram or whatever.
But yeah,
Zuko's the best.
Zuko is a great example. Zuko's also just a great example of like the dichotomy of antagonist versus villain
Yeah.
as well. I will also say, just kind of going off of the idea of like what that is, there are times where the antagonistic force and the villain, yes, are the same thing, which is kind of the point. But what I think makes a great antagonistic villain in that whole sense of just embodying every sense of obstacle is when a character not only is like the physical representation of something, but also is damaged to a state of taking that on. There are countless villains out there that you can imagine that are like, oh, maybe they were prophesized to be a good guy, and then they fell from grace, or they were just a normal person that had life beat them down so far, and they became this dark thing, this evil entity that they became. Mm-hmm. And even further, circling back to what you said about entrances, I think, and this is my personal favorite villain entrance, at least in movies.
I already know what you're going to talk about. So
I love this scene with all of my heart.
I'll just let you take the reins for this one then.
I think there is no greater villain entrance than, and it's a weird one, just so stick with me. I think there's no greater villain entrance scene than the first time we see Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean. For anyone who has seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and I'm talking about the trilogy.
Yes, trilogy. There's not a fourth and a fifth.
Davy Jones makes up the quote-unquote villain slot for the back two movies. And when it comes to villains like that Davy Jones, like that family of villain that he sits in, he embodies so much terror and dread and existentialism in the one scene that we get to know him. I'll just walk you through the scene really quick. Jack Sparrow, in knowing that he's being tracked by Davy Jones because he owes him a debt, sends Will Turner a second. Jack doesn't do this himself. This is a villain that has Jack Sparrow, Mr. I'm just going to roll with the punches, send an emissary to meet with him, which automatically tells you that this is a guy that's going to terrify Jack Sparrow. We should be afraid of him. So Will goes over to this decrepit, crashed little ship where they think that the Flying Dutchman has been prowling, Davy Jones' ship. He goes on and he finds a nightmare of a place. Sailors dead, sailors with their faces being snatched off, a guy who still is running the riggings to the sails even though the ship has crashed. And out of the woodwork comes this army of fish-mutated sailors that are nightmare fuel for early 2000s viewers. And it looks fantastic even to this day. Like, go back and actually watch the CGI and the effects that they do in this movie.
No, it's really good.
It holds up 15 years later.
Honestly, the Davy Jones CGI is still to this day one of the most impressive things. Considering it came out in, what, 05, 06-ish?
05 or 6. It came out that time, and it still looks like it could have been done today, which is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
But you now have this fish army of nightmare sailors drop all the survivors, including Will Turner, to their knees, ready to be executed or taken hostage. And there's this one guy in the crowd that is just visually more disturbing than everyone else. He's got lobster claws coming out of his back. He's tall. He's hunched over. He's got a hammerhead shark head. Like, he's got, like, the wide eyes, this snarling, misshapen, jagged jawline. He's wielding a sword, and you think, that's the big bad. That's the scariest guy here. He's obviously in charge. And then it goes dead silent. There is this little puddle of water that the camera sits in, and you see a peg leg step into the shot. And this is the first thing you need to know. Already, we're dealing with someone who is less than human. And I'm not saying that if you're missing a leg or you're missing a limb, you're less human. I mean, physically, we're dealing with someone who is less human. Someone who has seen some shit. Someone who has had damage. You can just tell that by the peg leg, thematically. He's seen some shit. He's lost a leg. He's got some baggage. That's just writers. If a writer ever writes a character that's missing a body part, there is a reason for that. If they're missing a body part through damage or an accident or like a fight or something like that, there's even extra layer of writer's insight there. So automatically you get a peg leg in a pirate movie. You know this is a pirate that's seen some shit. And it's covered in barnacles, so it's old. So this character has been around. The next shot is you only see Davy Jones' left shoulder and part of his hat as he walks up next to Shark Dude. And Shark Dude falls in line and says, "Here, we got this many survivors. What do you want to do, sir?" This guy's calling him sir. He's not in charge. Shark guy, the most terrifying, bloodthirsty one. He's not the big bad. Okay, this is the big bad then, and we're not even seeing all of him in the same shot. He's still this nebulous character. We know he's missing a leg. We know he's imposing. Okay, he steps forward again, and you see him do this like walk the line kind of thing, where you just see part of his lower torso, as he strolls past all the prisoners. And you already know this guy's large and in charge just by that. You've not seen all of him in the same shot yet. You've not even seen his face. You've not seen his full body. You know that he radiates power just by this. And then here comes the one last shock, the firework. His arm comes up into the screen and he flexes his hand, or should I say claw, because his hand is a crab claw. Mm-hmm. So now we not only get the confirmation he's less than human because of his peg leg, he's not human at all, because he's got fish anatomy and he's charged of the fish pirates, right? So we have this nasty lobster claw which just slowly closes as if it's like a guillotine deciding someone's fate. And then you're like, oh, well, what are we going to see next? And then there it is, the money shot. You cut to this one prisoner on the line, shaking, freaking out, whimpering. This torso comes into the shot like someone standing over the prisoner, and then it drops and you get the mug shot. Squid beard, cold eyes, proud upturned tail captain's hat, holding a tobacco pipe. And he's ugly looking, and he stares right into the whimpering prisoner's eyes. And what does he have the audacity to ask? He says, "Do you fear death?" Holy shit. We're so afraid of this guy already. Jack Sparrow didn't even want to meet him. He's commanding a fish army. He's mercilessly just been terrorizing just his presence is enough to terrorize her. What can this monster look like? Oh my god, he looks like Cthulhu's child. And he drops, and then he basically turns to the audience and says, "Do you fear death?" He's the Grim Reaper. He's this agent of death. And what does he do? He takes a long drag off a tobacco pipe and sends it out of the weirdest squid anatomy I've ever seen and blows it on the side of his head. Says, "Do you fear death? Do you fear that dark abyss?" And then what does he say? He doesn't threaten to send you there. He doesn't threaten anything about that. He says, "I can offer you an escape." Oh my god, he's greater than death. He's offering you not death. He's not offering destruction. He's saying, "I can give you something that will prolong the inevitable. I can make you some sort of terror that will live beyond the mortal coil." He's not killing people. He's offering you a chance to become a monster like him. That's terrifying. And all of that, which I just took 5 minutes to explain to you, that happens within 45 seconds. This amazing build up to this wonderful entrance, and then you're stuck with him for 2 movies, and every scene he's in is absolute perfection, because you just get building. Because the great thing about Davy Jones is, yes, he's less than human. I stress that a lot. But you learn that he was a human. He has humanistic tendencies, and the whole reason he becomes Davy Jones is because he suffered from the one thing that every human being will go through at least one time in their life, and that's a broken heart. He lost the love of his life. He was lied to, and he said, like, "Oh, I will spend one day ashore with my love, who happens to be, the goddess of the sea," like any normal guy can land. But, oh, and 10 years, I gotta sail for 10 years and ferry the souls of the dead? That's fine. I'll do that. 10 years of service. He goes and does that like the chipper little lad he is, and he comes back to the beach, and where is the goddess of the sea? Not there. He spent 10 years of his immortal life doing a job never showed up. Of course he's angry. Of course he's heartless. Of course, and it also helps because Davy Jones had to cut out his heart to become Davy Jones. He is nothing but rage and grief personified, and any human can sympathize with that.
Yeah. No, it's a good pick. It's a good pick. So, I'm cheating a bit on my favorite villain intro scene, because I have two. But they go hand in hand. So, one of the two is also my favorite opening scene to a film of all time. And it also just so happens to be the villain's introduction. Because when you think of a superhero film, and you think of the opening scene, what are you expecting to see? You're expecting to meet our hero. You're expecting to potentially get a gist of what he's at, what he's doing, especially if it's a sequel. But instead, with a movie like 2008's The Dark Knight, we are thrown into a bank heist of which we don't know anything about. We just know that there's 5 or 6 people in clown masks about to rob a bank. And you see the whole scheme unfold. You see a few of them zip line onto the roof. You see a few of them infiltrate downstairs and take a bunch of people hostage. You see all of it working out, and then one by one they all start to pick them off and kill each one of their teammates because they want more. They want a higher share of the money. And then we get to the very end where a school bus plows through the building, and you notice there's only one clown left. And then the bank manager is on the ground after being shot, and he's like, he's yelling at the person like, "Oh, look at you criminals. What do you believe in? No criminal believes in anything." And you just hear the words, "I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger." And he takes off the mask, and it's the Joker. And it just goes to show you that, okay, so what we just witnessed was a very elaborately planned bank robbery in which the one guy who is their boss didn't let anybody else know that that was him, then got each one of them to kill them, making him the only one left. That way there's no witnesses and no accomplices left to talk about, and he escapes on a school bus with all of the money for himself and revels in the chaos that he just created. What an opening scene to a film that I didn't know was going to be the beginning, because I expected, oh, Batman Begins just ended, Dark Knight starting, probably gonna catch up with Batman, see what he's up to. No, it's first scene is this random bank robbery. You don't know what's going on, but you know exactly what's going on by the time you get to about the 5-6 minute mark and you see the Joker. And it's like, that's so good. And of course, that's the beginning of one of the great performances in cinematic history. But the other one I want to talk about that goes hand in hand with it is I didn't think Nolan could outdo himself. Because
you have the audacity to doubt Nolan.
Because I went into Dark Knight Rises saying there's no shot that he is going to top that movie, let alone the villain in that movie. But he came close, especially with the opening scene, with the villain aspect. I think Dark Knight is a superior film than The Dark Knight Rises by a pretty decent margin. But I think the villains are not as far apart as you think. Because that first scene with Bane is so good. On the plane, when he is able to just decimate that entire place, and that line where he takes off the mask, he's like, what's the next step of your master plan? And Bane just goes, crashing this plane. And it's like, what? And then it's like all the guys start flying in, and they take everybody, and they steal the scientist, and the plane explodes. And also, what a fantastic stunt. Those two scenes, Bane and the Joker, they establish the villain's control in the film almost immediately. While yours, in which I love the Davy Jones theme, while yours did something different, it established fear, and it established horror. These, which are my favorite, establish control, because it just shows how menacing these two can be on different levels. Because Bane is much more of the muscle, and he's able to do all the physical stuff, and he's able to explode a plane and knock out a guy with one swing, whereas the Joker is the one that has to make sure all of his traps are in the right place, all of the buttons are being pushed on every single person in the room, and that way he can get out unscathed and with all the laughs in the world. They're two different characters, but the way that Nolan introduces them is very similar, because it establishes their sense of control over the situation. And I love both of those. And oh god, they're so good.
I will raise you something as well, like Matt. There's also a very clear-cut difference between the examples I give and the examples you give. Your villains, which you say establish control, also do one very notable thing in their movies, which I think is also another hallmark of a fantastic villain. They win temporarily.
Well, yeah, they win. They win during their movie.
Joker
at different points.
At different points. I mean, granted, Bane wins in the first act.
Yeah, as soon as he breaks spoiler alert for The Dark Knight Rises. As soon as he breaks Batman's back, and he explodes half the city and traps all the police underneath in the subways.
Bane wins.
He wins.
He wins. Granted, the back half of the movie is like oh shit, he won. We have to clean up. And we have to go back. That's great. But like, Bane wins for half of his movie. The Joker wins in The Dark Knight.
No, anyone that says the Joker does not win
did not watch the movie.
They didn't watch the movie. The Joker wins in that movie, and that's why the ending works like it does. Because the Joker forces Batman to become a villain. The last thing he wants.
Yeah. He forces him to retire, essentially. He leaves. He just leaves Gotham.
And his presence is still felt in the very next movie. Because 7 years later, Gordon is still living with the fact that he is basically telling a lie to every person's face. He's like, yeah, Harvey Dent, truth and justice, not, oh yeah, this murderous psychopath who almost murdered my kid in front of me.
Yeah.
But because the Joker did that, he has to now live this facade and live this lie. And that's why when Bane then reveals the truth, it's that much more heartbreaking. Because you're like, it was all for nothing now. Because now it's even worse.
Yeah. You allowed this madman to come into your city, and he did it. Because Joker's whole point of, like, another fantastic scene from Heath Ledger's Joker is when Harvey Dent is in the hospital.
Oh, God. What a fantastic
Harvey Dent is now burned and essentially is becoming Two-Face. He's in the hospital, and he looks terrible. He's got one of his face burned off. And Joker makes this wonderful point. And he makes this point of, like, it doesn't matter who you are in Gotham City or wherever. Anyone can have the right kind of bad day to make you go nuts.
Yeah.
Any person in that world, in our world, in any setting, can have just enough of a bad day to go off the rails. And what does Joker do? That morning that he talks to Harvey Dent, he orchestrates the perfect bad day. That's essentially what it is. Like, that Joker's master plan isn't, I'm going to go here and do this, or I'm going to get these boats and this river with explosives. No. What he does, he just embodies, I want to give Gotham the worst day it's had. Yeah. That's his only plan. And
then continue that.
I imagine that on his planner for that day, he said, okay, Operation Worst Day Ever. Like, that's pretty much what it says.
I just do things.
He quite literally, like, that's his whole plan. He's just going to go do things for 24 hours, and then by the end of the night, everyone is going to be miserable. Everyone's going to be afraid. No one's going to trust another person.
I'm a dog chasing cars.
That's his point. What does he do? Oh, there's like 300 people trapped on 2 different boats. Let's just make them play a game of maybe murder each other.
It really is the fight for, like, I read this once. The Dark Knight is really a fight for Gotham's soul. Even the Joker says it.
Yeah.
You didn't think I would risk losing the fight for Gotham's soul in a fist fight with you. And then he talks about how hard it really, and that final climax, everyone who's like I remember when I first watched the movie, I was like, man, I really wanted Batman and Joker to, like, fight more. But, like, that's not their dynamic. Their dynamic is, because I was 8 years old when I saw this movie. I just wanted to see people punch each other. But when I watched it, when I watched the movie,
8-year-old Matt craves
when I
violence.
watched the movie again, I'm like, yes. When I watched the movie again, I'm like, no, this is perfect, because the Joker and Batman. The thing about the Joker is, if it were a battle of brute strength, Batman would win in an instant every single time. But the Joker knows just how to turn his dials and push all of his buttons to make him he makes him ride the line between a hero and a criminal. And that's what you see at the end of the movie. He then becomes a criminal because Batman's thing is he doesn't kill people. So what does the Joker do throughout the entirety of The Dark Knight? Force Batman into situations where he will have to kill him if he is going to stop the madness. How is he going to stop Gordon from potentially being assassinated or the mayor? He has to kill the Joker. How is he going to stop these ferries from exploding? He has to kill the Joker. How is he going to stop the hospital from exploding? He has to kill the Joker.
And
it's
he
the
doesn't
only
do
way,
it.
and he doesn't do it because that's the part, and that's what makes their dynamic so good. And that's why, honestly, the Joker, especially in The Dark Knight, is, in my opinion, a perfect villain because he's a foil to Batman. And that ending scene with the ferries, it's all of what Batman's been working for versus all of what Joker's working for. Will these innocent people save one another, and will Gotham be redeemed for this one shining moment? Or will it all blow up in his face, and will the civilians turn on each other? And that's what then happens in Dark Knight Rises.
Did they have a bad enough day to make them snap?
Exactly.
That is the mission that he sets out to do. And he accomplishes it.
And then Bane really accomplishes it because Gotham literally becomes a war zone in the
matter of hours. In the matter of hours, it becomes a war zone.
But I love those two villains.
It's
so
fantastic.
Much.
I will also throw, like, granted, not as grandiose of a planner, but I will also throw into the ring, I believe, a villain that also perfectly demonstrates not just a hero's folly of manipulating their plans, but also a villain that does the opposite of the Joker while doing the same thing. Joker and Batman's relationship is Joker is essentially Batman's biggest fan. And he wants to get him noticed. Like, I want you to notice me. I want you to play into my pocket. I want you to follow my crazy, messed up ideology for the world. And Batman is this stoic knight that has to be like, I'm going to stick by my morals. I'm going to be the overseer. I need to be the one with the broad shoulders and the tough face. One of my personal favorite villain-hero pairings in pop culture is almost the opposite. Almost. Not exact, but almost the opposite. And it's also a villain that in his greatest outing in his series wins in the first act of the game.
I'm interested to hear what this is.
I'm talking about one of my favorite video game villains. I'm talking about Ganondorf. And I'm talking specifically about Ocarina of Time's Ganondorf. For anyone who's played Ocarina of Time, especially the N64 version, it is a timeless classic. It is the purest form, I think, of Legend of Zelda storytelling. Now, granted, there are better games than Ocarina of Time quality-wise. Like Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece. But I'm talking like in the old annals of history for Legend of Zelda. Ocarina of Time is the game that made Legend of Zelda a mainstay force. And they are beautiful puzzle-solving games. They have actually fantastic stories. They're a wonderful experience to play. And I loved the pairing of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask as a child. Majora's Mask is probably one of my favorite video games of all time. Yeah, but I'm choosing Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. And don't worry, I'm going to talk about Skull Kid in a second. Because he deserves merit as well. Because he is, I think, the Joker equivalent from video games.
All right, I'm excited.
My dichotomy on Ganondorf and Skull Kid. Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, you only hear about him. The first time you see Ganondorf is when you have broken into the castle garden in Hyrule, and as young Link, you and young Zelda are talking about your fears for the future, because you're kind of led there by your fairy, and she's like, something evil's going on in Hyrule, and Princess Zelda, as a child, explains this man from the desert came and has been kind of subtly manipulating her father, and you see through the window this tall, dark man in this evil-looking cloak, bright red hair, with a sneer on his face, bowing in service to the king. And he notices you through the window just a little bit. But as you duck down and get out of sight, he explains, like, he's definitely manipulating my father. He definitely is after the magic inside of the Temple of Time. I'm worried that he might accomplish, like, doing something very nasty. So I need you to go around. I need you to get the keys to the Temple of Time so you can go inside and claim that power for yourself and help me stand against him. Okay, simple enough. I'm going to go do 3 temples. I'm going to go suffer through a water temple that I really hate. I'm going to go back. And I go back, and I go to the Temple of Time. I open it, and I realize, oh, there's like a whole pedestal thing here. Oh, I need the Ocarina of Time to open the door. Okay, well, I'm going to go out. I'm going to go get that. Here's the problem. You leave the temple. You go back to Hyrule. And who is standing over you, who doesn't even, by the way, you are assaulted by monsters outside of Hyrule walls. You're knocked to the ground. And who is standing over you on his horse? Ganondorf himself.
Dun, dun, dun.
The sky is dark, and it's the first time you actually see and interact with him, you hear him speak. And his theme music kicks in, and it's dark, nasty piano organ style music. It's this nasty riff. And the best thing about it is he talks to himself. He doesn't even notice you underneath of him for like the first couple lines of his dialogue, and he just talks about how, like, oh, I'm glad I got it done, like, I've done it, the Triforce of Power will be mine, I will rule Hyrule. And then he notices you, and he knows who you are, and he says, oh, thanks, kid, for making it easy for me, essentially. And then you're like, what did I do? And then he rides off into the sunset. He's won. You go back, and you're like, oh shit, he opened the door. He opened the door. He got into the Temple of Time. He got the power. Oh my god, I handed it to him. I handed it to him by going and doing the thing that I was asked of as a hero. So what do? You go into the Temple of Time. You realize, oh, there's one thing he couldn't get. He couldn't get into the inner sanctum that you needed the sign. He got the power. He got the keys. He got able to do it. He got access to the inner sanctum. But he didn't get the one thing behind the last door, and that's the Master Sword, which allows you to travel forward in time to be an adult. The first time you pull the sword out, the grand animation plays. You get this. You become this adult version of Link, and you wander outside, and guess what's waiting for you? This bright, cheery town that Hyrule Castletown was, it's ruins. Every house has been burned to the ground. Everything is ruined. No one's alive. There's zombies walking the streets. The sky is dark and gray. There's no music. It's just airy nothingness blowing through the ruins of this once proud town. Hyrule Castle, no longer a pretty ivory tower. It's this dark fortress on the hill. There's lightning in the sky. It is the end of the world. And you're just sitting there and you're like, oh shit, I did this. I allowed Ganondorf to win. And then the worst part hits you. It's not like you time traveled to the future to become an adult. When you drew the Master Sword, how time travel works is you went into hibernation for 7 years. You not only handed him the keys to the castle, you left him with the castle itself. You accidentally gave him every single thing he wanted. Here's the keys, I'm going away on vacation, have fun. And he turns Hyrule into a nightmare. A living nightmare that is under his subjugation. And what do you have to do? You have to clean that mess up. You have to go around. And the worst part to cap it all off is the whole game focuses on this grand theme of being a child and being an adult. Do you have the respect of a child? Do you need to be respected as an adult? Does your childhood influence like your adult deeds? And Ganondorf is the only character that no matter what time period you're in, refers to you as a child, refers to you as that helpless boy from the forest chasing fairies. And the part where that hits you home, where this terrifying message of control kicks in, it's the final dungeon. You're in Ganondorf's castle. You've got all the gear. You've got the Master Sword. You've got the armor. You've got all the pieces of the Triforce. You have the sages backing you up. You get to the final set of floors to climb up. And the music goes from dungeon music to Ganondorf's theme on a gut-wrenching, horrific organ. Like, I'm talking like rattles your chest organ. You get through the last couple of spiral staircases and the music grows louder and louder and louder as you just loop the castles outside. You just keep going. You kick the door down to what you think is going to be a boss fight. Maybe he's sitting on his throne. Maybe he has the Princess Zelda tied up somewhere. Maybe he's just like sitting there juggling magic in his hand because he's an all-powerful sorcerer. No. You kick the door down. It's a beautiful cathedral. He's sitting in the castle's cathedral. A mockery to the gods that he's like offended, that his people tore down. He sits in a cathedral. Princess Zelda is, of course, imprisoned in a force field because that's just her job. He's just waiting there. And what is he doing? This suave motherfucker is playing his own villain theme on the organ. And guess what he does? He doesn't just sit there and play his own villain theme and just finishes his symphony and turns. He berates and chides you and calls you a miserable little child while he finishes the symphony. He just doesn't care. He doesn't even turn around. He just knows it's you. And he finishes his own villain song, calling you a child, calling it helpless, calling you worthless, saying that this is where you're going to fall because you're nothing but a child in an overgrown body. And then he finally finishes the symphony, turns around, flashes the Triforce on his hand and says, all right, I'm done playing with you now. And then starts the greatest game of tennis-based boss fights in video game history. Does that not shock you to your core? Does that not terrify you? He won every second of the way, and all he needed to do in the very end was just, like, destroy you. And guess what? Here's how badass this guy is. Ocarina of Time, because it plays with time travel, fully establishes that there's a canon where he wins.
Yeah.
He wins twice in one game in a timeline. If you die even once during the boss fight, in theory, that's a whole alternate timeline where Ganondorf just killed you, threw you into the abyss, and then ruled for the rest of his life. You fail. You can lose that game, and it's canon. He can win twice in his own game. Twice! That's terrifying. All while he starts the final encounter by playing his own theme song.
Yeah, that's kind of badass. I want to bring up a quality in a villain, though, that I also think is really, really cool, and I have multiple examples to back this up. But I want to see if you agree with me. Part of what makes a villain very scary for me is when they are not scary.
Yes. They're not imposing.
Like when they're just like
a god.
Very calm, collected, very monotone even, but you just know that by the look on their face and what they're doing, they could kill your family in an instant. Like it's just one of those things.
I'm anxious to hear what your
I have
example
4
is.
examples of these. And I'm not gonna go as in depth with all of them, but like I want to bring up these 4 because these are 4 of my favorite villains. So the first one, really going off of the monotone-esque, not even being an actual living thing.
Please be who I think it is.
Well, I'm gonna get to that person if that's who you think I'm talking about, but I'm first talking about Hal from 2001: A
Very
Space
good.
Odyssey.
Not who I thought you were going to say first, but also a fantastic
In my
example.
opinion, the best part of that movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey is obviously a cinematic classic, but it's not one of those movies where I'm like, man, I really want to watch that movie right now. Like, it's one of those movies you watch once, you're like, that was fantastic. You watch it maybe like 5 years after, like, this is still a very good movie.
And then after that, you only watch the scenes with Hal.
Exactly. If I go on YouTube, I watch the scene where he gets shut down. I watch the scene where he kills the people on the spaceship. I watch the scene where he's reading the lips. Like, it's fantastic. And the thing about Hal that I love is that he's everywhere. Most shots on the spaceship, Kubrick frames it in a way that you see just that little red light in the background. Just so no, he's always looking. He's always there. And the scene that they show where he's reading the lips, the way that it's shot where he's like zooming in, like you see his perspective and you don't hear anything, but you just see their lips moving, you're like, oh, you know exactly what he's doing. He's now going to just screw everything up. And it's fantastic. Love Hal. The other one, also an AI sort of villain, and going back to video games, GLaDOS.
Yes!
From Portal.
Yes!
Which my brother and I played through those games a lot, especially the co-op mode of Portal 2, which is one of the best co-op modes in video games. If you haven't played that, play it. But GLaDOS is horrifying because of that voice and because of the fact that, once again, she kind of is in charge of everything, and she and all of her deeds, all of her evilness, all of her scheming, it's for science. And it's just like, I'm so scared of that voice. I'm so scared of everything. In fact, it's so intimidating that Guillermo del Toro got the voice actress of GLaDOS to voice one of the evil AIs in Pacific Rim. That's how freaking awesome she was.
And also, like, multiple years in a row, IGN and even the Guinness Book of World Records, their video game branch, multiple times has like put out surveys of like, what do you think is the greatest video game villain of all time? And GLaDOS is always in the top 5, and for many years she's been the top 1.
Well, she's the main antagonist of the first Portal game. In Portal 2, it's like the first half, but then you meet Wheatley, and GLaDOS is actually then an ally, but like you still don't trust her because of all the shit that happened in the
but
first
then the
one.
moon scene happens, and like she's back to being in charge.
Well, that moon scene is, in my opinion, one of the best things in a video game ever. But GLaDOS, so intimidating for so many reasons, and honestly, I love that voice acting, and it's just perfect. The other 2 I want to talk about are now one in film, one in television. So the one in television I want to talk about, and I won't get into too much detail because you have not seen this show, and you are watching it eventually, is Gus from Breaking Bad, who is just an unbelievable villain because he almost is kind of justified in everything that he does, and he runs his business like a business. He's not your typical meth kingpin. He runs a fast food joint. He dresses in very fancy clothes. He always never raises his voice. He's basically the perfect boss on the surface level, who, by the way, just happens to run a gigantic global empire of methamphetamine. And every single time you see him, he just has the same face. He's very calm, very collected. And the one scene that still scares me to the core is after our main characters have done something that Gus disapproves of, he walks into the meth lab with our 2 main characters sitting there. And this is at the beginning of season 4. And our 2 main characters are pleading to Gus because they know that they did something wrong, and Gus is probably going to either fire them, kill them, or both. And they're pleading for their lives. They're saying, we'll do whatever you want. We'll go right back to work. It'll have nothing. And Gus, throughout 8 minutes of screen time, does not say a single word. He's just pacing around the room. He takes off his nice dress clothes and puts on a lab coat underneath it, over it. And he just walks around the room, doesn't say anything. And then instead of killing our 2 main characters, he then slices someone's neck open with a box cutter. And it's the person that was supposed to then take over for our 2 main characters, kills this person right in front of them, lets him bleed to death, walks back, changes back into his dress clothes, walks up the stairs. Our characters are in utter shock, and he just says, well, get back to work. And then he leaves. Like 9 minutes of just tension, and it's perfect. And then the other one I want to talk about that's comic collected, which now you'll be able to relate to, is the late great Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber in Die Hard.
It's not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls off Nakatomi Plaza.
It's not. No, he's the best. I mean, when I think of Alan Rickman, I know most people think of Snape, but I think Hans Gruber's right up there with that in terms of his best roles. Because
Snape is a great character. Snape is a great supporting character. He's a great ally, but Hans Gruber is a great villain.
No, and John McClane is a great action hero, but every great action hero needs a villain, and they're complete opposites. John McClane is a over his head cop who's very cocky. He's constantly saying, yippee-ki-yay and whatever. Whereas Hans is basically just a businessman, and he's just... He treats everybody like his employees. He walks into the building, and the first thing he says, ladies and gentlemen, and just immediately has the control of the room. And he's just like, he wears a suit. He's very calm and collected. He'll kill you in an instant. Like the guy, it's like, what are you going to do? Kill me? He's like, okay. And he shoots him in the head. Just point blank. Love Hans. One of the best parts of Die Hard. One of the reasons why it works is because of the villain. So those are my 4 examples of how I think not being the definition or the prototype of scary is sometimes even scarier, because it leaves you with your expectations subverted and you don't know what's coming next. And then when those characters who are normally calm, collected, are then yelling and like if they're in the state of peril, if they're like begging for their life or they're like flipping out on someone, then you know shit's about to go down. Because we've seen them 99% of the time act one way, and now they're acting a completely different way. You know something's happening. So it's nuts.
Yeah, you gotta say, I get floored every time I watch a movie.
I like my examples.
I do. I have one that I want to tack on, which also I think fits into another topic, which I definitely want to talk about with you on the term of like what makes a great villain. I have not just a monotone villain. I have not just a cold, unfeeling human. I have a villain that I think is a perfect example of not just unrelenting force, but also human without being human. And I would even put them into the term of a twist villain. Even though you know they're the villain, you don't know why they're the villain.
Okay.
And especially, it's also topical because we just got the trailer for the 4th movie of the franchise a couple of days ago.
Are you talking about Mr. Smith?
I'm talking about Agent Smith.
Oh, Agent Smith. Yeah,
talking about Agent Smith from The Matrix. The Matrix is... Okay, the first Matrix is a masterpiece. It's a cult classic. The other two, have your opinions. I like the other 2 Matrix movies, but some people don't. I get that. I completely understand that.
I actually don't mind the 3rd one.
The 3rd one's not bad.
It's the 2nd one I have the most problems with.
Yeah.
I don't really like Reloaded that much.
Reloaded is not that great, but I will still watch it. But here's the thing. Agent Smith...
He's first of all played by Hugo Weaving,
who's
a legend.
A legend. but Agent Smith, at the first time so Agent Smith is essentially just like the AI that is in charge of the Matrix. Essentially, he's the guy who is like running it so that the aliens can harvest human bodies for bioelectricity. But Agent Smith is an AI. He's not a human. He is a program within the Matrix, and he takes the appearance of essentially an FBI agent. Black suit, black tie, sunglasses, earpiece. Mm-hmm. And all the other AIs that are under his command, or at least work with him, look like that. They are not clones of each other, but they picture a white guy with sunglasses and a close-cropped haircut. That's what any of them look like. Agent Smith... The first time you see him is essentially, you think like he's this FBI agent responding to like a cop's call about a criminal. And he gets out of the car, and the cop doesn't regard him with, oh, hi, Mr. FBI, or oh, hey, anything. It's just, oh, about time you got here, this one's going to be a problem. Agent Smith is cold and calculated. He's like, oh, I know who you're dealing with. I understand what the situation is. And he goes in himself, and he goes in with his boys, and after fighting Trinity for a little bit, he does this weird thing in the fight with Trinity where you know automatically something is off, even though you don't know that you're in the Matrix yet. All the other guys that he brought with him are just like guns out, taking cover, taking shots at Trinity. Smith is thinking with a little bit of creativity that's very subtle, but it's not like you wouldn't directly notice it. There's one weird scene where while everyone else is trying to shoot at Trinity, Smith gets into a garbage truck and tries to run her over. Which, like, you think, like, he's just pulling something drastic because he's a good FBI agent. and you don't think anything more of it. But then Trinity gets away, and the movie progresses. Then we see him a long time later when he finds out that Neo is the one, so he goes to arrest Neo. And, like, who doesn't know he's Neo yet. He just thinks he's Mr. Anderson. So he goes to try and arrest Neo. That fails, but here's the thing. Anderson is particularly focused on getting Neo. Like, he's more desperate than the other mindless drones around him. But you don't know why. Mm-hmm. You get nothing from this man. The next time you see Neo, it's not even Neo. It's by the time... not Neo. So the next time you see Agent Smith, it's not even Agent Smith. It's by the time Neo realizes who he is, and Morpheus has led him into simulations within the simulation to train him as the Chosen One. And it's when he, like, does this simulation when Neo is like, oh, anyone could be Mr. Smith in hiding. And all of a sudden, there's just a Mr. Smith projection pointing a gun at Neo, and it freaks Neo out. And there's this wonderful... I think it's one of the greatest cinematography shots in cinema history, where it's Morpheus just looking into the camera, talking to Neo about the threat that Agent Smith is, and in Morpheus's sunglasses is Mr. Smith pointing the gun at Neo. And it shows that Mr. Smith is everywhere, he knows where you are at all times, he's a dangerous AI. But that's the thing, he's still phrased as this AI, this unrelenting force of the Matrix. Mm-hmm. So you think, oh, he's just a computer program. What's so bad about a very talented killer computer program? And the movie progresses more, and eventually Morpheus and the crew are, like, stopped by Smith again, and Morpheus sacrifices himself, and he stays behind to wrestle with Smith so Neo can get away. And Morpheus is arrested, and he's taken to essentially, like the headquarters, and is interrogated by Smith and a couple of the other drones. And the first part of this interrogation is Smith acts weirdly human all of a sudden. He's like, did you ever take a look at the Matrix? Really look at it and revel in it? And he talks about how great the Matrix is for a minute. And, like, he's like, oh, he's not just, like, an AI that, like, is doing a job. He is an AI that loves the Matrix. He thinks this is great. Like, yeah, he knows he was built by the machines, but he's like, oh, he must really have a thing for, like, the Matrix. And then he keeps going, and then he talks about more humanistic tendencies of, like, fear, of being afraid, of having these goals, and I'm going to stop them. He's actually standing... He's standing for the Matrix. He wants to defend the Matrix. He's like, I need to keep you here because now it's just my job, but this is my world. You're in my world. And you're like, oh, I get it. It's just as simply like, oh, it's like, oh, humans want to be free and get to their world, but they're needed here because the Matrix is the AI world. The AI world needs to live. So that's why he's like... But they get nowhere. Morpheus won't crack. And one of the agents suggests maybe we're not asking the right questions of Morpheus. And Agent Smith says, leave me with him. Which the other agents are like, what? That's not your programming. And he's like, leave me with him and I can get you the answers. And he's like, all right, if you want to go off program, then fine, go off program. But we'll be back in a few minutes. And they leave. And here's where you know it gets serious. The entire time, you've seen all the agents with sunglasses and an earpiece. And he leans down next to Morpheus and he says, I want to be honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you. And he takes his sunglasses off. And he takes his earpiece out. And now you're looking at just a man. You're looking at a man who you know is a computer program. He looks like a man. He's not one of the faceless. He's Agent Smith. He is a man. And he grabs Morpheus by the neck and pulls him real close. And he's like, I hate it here. I have to get out of here. Zion is my last hope. I need you to get me out of here, and Neo is the key. I will do anything to hunt you filthy animals down, you biological organisms. And I will kill you, I will take your city, and I will be free of this prison that was designed for me to hold you here. The problem here is, your existence forces me to be trapped here, and I want to eradicate all of you. Holy shit, where did that come from? You just fed us a lie about how you loved being an AI and the Matrix is beautiful. He's a prisoner. He's desperate to stop existing, but he doesn't want to die. He wants to get out of the Matrix. He wants to get a physical body to inhabit. Yeah. He's a virus, not an AI. He's become sentient. The program has become sentient, and it needs to leave. Oh my god!
It's good stuff.
And then when he fights Neo after this, it's no longer cold and calculated. He takes the sunglasses off. He displays emotion when he fights Neo. He's anxious to kill Neo. He's excited. He's thinking of creative and sadistic ways. He almost gets Neo run over by a train. An AI would just shoot a guy. Even then, when he shoots a guy, there's a point where Smith unloads a full clip of handgun ammunition into Neo's chest. A sane person who has no vendetta does not do that. He's this terrifying force of hatred. And you don't see it coming. It's a perfect twist. You know he's the villain, but then when the reason is revealed, it's so much better. He's a twist villain without being a twist villain. It's perfect.
Speaking of twist villains.
Twist villains?
Twist villains.
What about twist villains?
So that's a story thread that's usually used in a story thread that's usually used in a lot of movies today is
the twist.
You think you know who the villain is? Psych! You don't. And sometimes it works and sometimes it really, really doesn't. I think obviously the main source of twist villains when you think is in kids movies. So I guess we can talk about that for a second. So I actually want to first talk about a good twist villain, and you might think this isn't a twist villain, but I argue that it is.
Well, I just argue that Smith was a twist villain.
Well, it's not he's a twist villain. It's that the reason why he's a villain is a twist. So yeah.
That's fair.
He's a villain with a plot twist around his story. But the twist villain I actually want to talk about is a villain that most people don't even think of as a twist villain, but if you really think about it, he is. Syndrome in The Incredibles.
Yes.
I think, personally.
I think he's a twist villain.
Because when you first meet him, he's this little kid who looks up to Mr. Incredible, and Mr. Incredible's like, fly home, buddy, I work alone. And Syndrome is like, well, buddy at that point, is like heartbroken. He's like, it's really the trope of never meet your heroes. And then when he finally shows up, about like 50 minutes into the movie, he's not in the movie until like about halfway through. And he shows up and you're like, that guy looks familiar. But then when he says, I was your biggest fan. And then it's like,
Buddy.
Oh, it's Buddy. And it's like, whoa. Like, because you thought the villain was the Omnidroid or like whoever Mirage worked for, but you never actually met the person yet. And then when you actually finally see who it is, you're like, so that actually created a villain. So Mr. Incredible's selfishness created a villain. And now he's the biggest force there to deal with. I think that's a very clever way to do a twist in the unconventional way. Because when you think of a twist villain, you think of a character that you know throughout the whole movie. And then the last 20 minutes, it's like, surprise, I'm important and I'm also evil. And you're like, oh, all right. And then when you watch the movie again, it doesn't work. And the main example that you're probably thinking of, and that I'm probably thinking of, is in the most recent Disney movies, with movies like Frozen, or movies like Big Hero 6, or movies like Zootopia. Granted,
no, Zootopia,
the sheep.
It's not bad. It's not as bad as the other ones you mentioned. If we're gonna put those three movies,
honestly, though, the thing about all three of those movies I just listed, I still like these movies, and to some extent, Frozen is kind of the worst of the three, but I still don't hate it.
I like two of them.
Well, yeah. I would give Frozen a very average, like 5 out of 10.
That's generous.
But like Big Hero 6 I actually still enjoy, and Zootopia I think is great. But they all have crappy twist villains. Because they're the villains that they're only doing it for shock value. They're not doing it for the sake of story. Villains like Syndrome, or even like Mr. Waternoose in Monsters, Inc. That's a twist villain.
Yeah, Mr. Waternoose is a twist villain.
Like, those work.
You think it's Randall the entire time.
Because their motivations make sense. The story still holds up upon rewatch, watching what they do. And it creates interesting dilemmas for our characters. Of those three things I just said, Hans, Mayor Bellwether, is that the sheep? And Callahan from Big Hero 6, they only fulfill the last thing, and that is creating dilemmas for our characters. They don't actually have any motivation other than, oh, surprise, I'm evil. And it doesn't hold up on repeat viewing, because when you watch it, you're like, I don't see where that came from. I feel like it's just to shock kids, which is not the way to write a twist villain, in my opinion. No. A good way to write a twist villain is something like Wreck-It Ralph, where King Candy is revealed to be the racer game that left and hacked over Turbo and took over the game. That's clever. That's kind of like the Mr. Agent Smith thing, where you have a villain and you know he's the villain. But why is he the villain?
Yes.
These are just like, oh, surprise, they're bad. Like,
and it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Hans specifically. Hans pisses me off. And the sad thing is
the laziest
Two of my favorite villains of all time are named Hans. Hans Gruber and Hans Landa from Inglourious Bastards. Yeah. And yet there's a third Hans that's absolute garbage.
Yeah. Hans Landa and Hans Gruber are phenomenal cinematic villains. They're absolutely wonderful. And then there's... What even is that Hans' last name?
Of the Southern Isles.
Sure. Hans of the Southern Isles. God, I hate that movie so much.
Most do.
I could talk for an hour on why Frozen is a cinematic disaster, but like that's another day.
It's just the villain where, first of all, I will say this: watching Frozen for the first time, I didn't see it coming. I'll give the movie that.
Well, that's the problem, though.
But that's exactly the problem.
You didn't see it coming because you're like, who are you?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, like, you were important?
And I love that. And upon rewatch, there's one scene in particular that was pointed out in one of my favorite YouTubers. His name is Shay Frillis. He brought up a point where there's the scene where after they sing... after Hans and Anna first meet, there's a shot of Hans when like his boat tips over and he like looks up and he like smiles at Anna. And at the first time, you're like... oh, that guy really cares about her. But then upon rewatch, you're like, oh, that guy can't wait to kill that girl's sister and take over her kingdom. Like, it doesn't make sense.
What is the smile for? What's the song for? No one knows. Why are you here?
Also, why did he wait to become evil until the moment that Anna come back? Why didn't, when Anna was gone and Elsa was gone, why didn't he then enact an evil plan
He could have declared martial law. He's a royal. He could have just been like, oh, by the way, I'm the royal with the most authority here. I will defend you on behalf of my kingdom against your now like witchcraft leader.
It's just bad writing.
It's so bad writing.
And Zootopia, I actually still think is a great movie. And even though that sheep twist at the end, I really don't like.
It wasn't bad, but it was just weak.
I like the idea of her being the villain. I just don't like the fact that they waited till the last 8 minutes of the movie to do it.
They could have done like a villainous side shot. They could have done like one scene. They could have done like a little bit bigger hint. Like, I like Bellwether as a character. I like Bellwether as a theme. I think the theme of that movie was fantastic. I just feel like you could have put maybe 10 minutes of screen time towards developing her as a villain instead of just like, wait, why is the awkward sheep woman pointing guns at people now?
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. And Callahan, I think, does the best job out of the three you mentioned. Callahan is okay as a twist villain. Like, he's very comic book campy.
Just all three of these characters go from... I'm this way to now I'm an evil tyrant maniac who has no regard for human life.
Put the gas pedal all the way down.
Another good twist villain, actually, going back to Pixar. Pixar knows what the hell they're doing, first of all. Yeah. It's really the Disney. Lotso in Toy Story 3.
Also another good twist.
Another one that kind of happens halfway through, similar to Syndrome, but you don't think he's the villain until he is.
He's quite literally a cuddly, nice teddy bear when you first meet him.
But there's motivation given to him, and that's why it works.
Yeah, he is a hatred.
You understand him, and that's another good part. That's another great characteristic of villains. Some villains, you actually look at them and you go, they're kind of right. Yeah. It's the sad truth. Watching a movie, you're like... no, I mean, they have a really good point. The one that sticks out to me, we haven't mentioned the MCU yet, but I'm going to say Killmonger from Black Panther.
That's a great sympathetic villain.
Part of me actually agrees with Killmonger more than any character in that movie.
Yeah.
He has such good reasoning for why he's doing what he's doing. And yes, his methods are wrong, but the reasoning and the motivation that he has is so justified that you're like... I can't help but agree with you.
Yeah,
it's sad.
There's a point where like that's another great point. Like there's a level of sympathy that you have to have for your villains. There's a point where I feel like what really makes a good villain as well is if you can imagine like you're like, you know what, he makes a point. And I'm not saying we're all villains watching these movies. I'm saying that like a villain has to be believable to the point where you could understand their motivations and why.
They can't just be obstacles.
They can't just be obstacles.
Most, especially comic book villains, are just evil guy wants to destroy the world. Heroes have to stop him before he sends his alien army to come kill everyone. Yes. Like the one that comes out sticks out to me is like, you know, Malekith in Thor: The Dark World, or Ronan in Guardians of the Galaxy.
They're just there to destroy a planet.
Or Enchantress in Suicide Squad. They're just villains that are just there to be the bad guy in the movie and the big thing for our heroes to fight.
I'm going to make a bold claim.
I'm ready for your bold claim.
Granted, he's the best version of that kind of villain, but I still think he's a villain that's just, I am evil to be evil to a point. I mean, yes, he has reasons. They're bad reasons. But, like, he has reasons for what he does. He has a following that agrees with him, as bad as that is. And you'll see why I say that. But I think that while as good of a villain as he is, I also think he's hindered by the kind of villain he is, Voldemort.
Well, yeah,
my bold claim...
Well, Voldemort is good because of the connection he has with our hero.
He's good, yes.
That's why.
Here's the thing, though. Voldemort, if you didn't have the Chosen One angle, if the whole story was being told from the perspective of like Ron or Hermione instead of Harry, Voldemort's quality as a villain goes down immensely.
Absolutely.
Because Harry has a personal connection. Like, this is another thing. This is an example of a villain who needs to have a connection with your protagonist to work.
Another great aspect of a good villain, having a sort of dichotomy of like
there has
yin
to be
and
a
yang.
clash of ideals. There has to be a clash of something. There's something that ties your villain to your hero. If you told Harry Potter from the point of view of Ron or Hermione, which you could do, you could absolutely do that. If you did that, though, Voldemort immediately becomes dog shit. Like,
He's just the bad guy.
He's the bad guy. He's just Wizard Hitler, and that's what he is. That's what he is, and don't pretend that that's not the truth.
Wizard Hitler who shoots green beams.
Yeah, I want to. What's his mission? I'm going to make it only so pure-blooded wizards can cast magic. That sounds very 1940s of you.
Yeah.
Like, oopsie.
No. I like Voldemort as a villain.
I like Voldemort as a villain. She's like, that's the problem.
And honestly, he has one of my favorite villain intro scenes because.
Which one? Which one are you talking about?
His true form in Goblet of Fire when that happens. Because, he's in Sorcerer's Stone, but, he's not really. And Chamber of Secrets, he's there as Tom Riddle. And Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best one,
he's not
even
in.
So it's kind of funny. But no, Goblet of Fire, it's honestly the only time in the Harry Potter movies up to that point where I was genuinely horrified. Because you felt like Harry was in a situation where
he couldn't win.
He was just doomed to fail.
Yeah, I will give Voldemort his credit. He wins in the Goblet of Fire.
By the way, another thing that makes a villain great, which we haven't even talked about yet, casting a good actor.
If we're talking about like voice acting or actual acting, yes.
Yeah, because Ralph Fiennes is really good in that role.
Oh, I just realized I had something I wanted to bring up. Never mind. Go. You go.
Well, no, I want
to circle back.
I'm just saying, Ralph Fiennes is great as Voldemort, and that's another reason why he works. And a lot of these villains we've stated before have fantastic performances behind them. Heath Ledger, Hugo Weaving, Davy Jones, Bill Nighy as Billy Jones. Davy Jones, not Billy Jones. Davy Jones.
Bill Nye, he's a science guy.
Bill Nye, the science guy.
Bill.
No, a good performance. But no, Voldemort I really, really love.
Oh, his casting is perfect.
As in the movies, yeah, and even in the books too. But the reason why Voldemort is good is you hit the nail right on the head. It's the relationship he has with Harry, because Harry having that force that destroyed something in his past, but then Harry led to Voldemort's downfall, and now Harry's the only obstacle standing in the way of Voldemort coming back, and then the link that they have with one another, it makes the story so much more compelling. And if it was told from the perspective of literally any other character, it wouldn't be fun. And Voldemort also has some weaknesses, which is another great aspect of a villain.
You can't make your villain immortal or invulnerable.
Because Voldemort has a very, very big weakness in these movies, and that is Dumbledore is the biggest fear that he has. He cannot, for the life of him, beat Dumbledore, and he is horrified of him, which makes Dumbledore's death in Half-Blood Prince devastating on multiple levels, because not only is Harry's father figure, hypothetically, now dead, but now there's nothing standing in the way of Voldemort. You have to give your villain weaknesses, because they can't just be perfect evil machines that have absolutely no personality. They have to have some flaws.
And when you take a lich like Voldemort, because that's what he is, he's a lich. He's a wizard that's undead with a phylactery. In this case, he overachieved and got 7. Like, when you take a lich like Voldemort as your entity, thematically, as a lich-like being, you automatically know he has weaknesses. Everything you need to know is just by the word lich. I am a thing that you have to do. You have to do an oddly specific thing to defeat me. And that's what Harry is. He is the oddly specific thing that will defeat Voldemort. Voldemort is a good villain. It's just like, I will say, he's one of the few villains that, while he is as great through the lens being told, he's not good through any other lens. Which is why, like, you can read, like, a lot of different, like, stories about, like, solo villain adventures. Like, but, like, for instance, I'm just going to pick on Darth Vader again because it's easy. Because, like, there's a lot of comic books out there for him. You can read a Darth Vader adventure without Luke Skywalker. You can read a Lord Sauron spin-off from the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
But, like, without Bilbo Baggins or Gandalf the Grey. But you can't really read a Voldemort story without Harry.
He's just a bad guy.
Or maybe Dumbledore. Like, that's the point. Like, he's a villain that's great, provided he has the great ground to stand on.
Yeah.
What
was this point you wanted to make?
I wanted to circle back because, like, I got off tangent with Voldemort, but I wanted to talk to you about what I thought was my favorite twist villain.
Oh, yes. What is your favorite Twist villain?
I
haven't even talked about my favorite either, but keep going. Yes. Because Syndrome is good, but
Syndrome
he's not my
is good,
favorite. I
My-
wonder if it's the same one.
It's not. It's absolutely not.
Okay. Is this from something like Kingdom Hearts or something?
I could go on a whole tangent about Kingdom Hearts' villains, and I might, but my favorite Twist villain comes from a book series, which I feel like most of our listeners either have read or have been exposed to, or at least have heard me talk about. My favorite Twist villain comes from Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And I'm specifically saying Percy Jackson and the Olympians because there's now like 5 book series involved in that universe, which Rick Riordan's a genius because he did the whole cinematic universe thing in books way before the cinematic universe thing in films was a concept. Mm-hmm. But Percy Jackson and the Olympians was his first book series that he ran, and it's focused on Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And it was yeah, I know, but it's for anyone who's not heard of this series, what are you doing? It's the Greek gods never die. The Greek gods have always exist. And they have demigod children, and the whole thing is the big 3, the most powerful Olympians, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, agreed that, because we're the most powerful gods, our children would be the most powerful demigods and could really, like, destroy a lot of stuff if they were evil. So we have a rule, the 3 of us can't have any more children, which the last time they had children was World War II. So, yeah, there's a point there. So they said, we're going to not have any more children. And, of course, because they're the Greek gods, if you've ever taken a storytelling class, you know that the Greek gods suck, morally. Of course, all 3 of them break that rule. They have children. But Percy is the son of Poseidon, so he's the son of the sea god. He has all these ocean-themed powers. He can breathe underwater, he can talk to fish, he can control water, so on and so forth. In the first book, he's a 12-year-old kid, and he finds out about all this, and when he finds out about this, Hades has discovered that a son of Poseidon lives, and he's not about that shit, because Hades has been bullied since his birth. So he's like, oh, no. If my brother has kids and they're still walking around, I can't have that. But here's the best part. He's also had a crime pinned on him. Percy not only is being hunted down by Hades' minions, partially out of hatred, but they think that he stole Zeus's lightning bolt. You know, the lightning bolt. Like, the first lightning bolt in existence. And he doesn't even know that. So, Percy is hunted down, his mom is kidnapped, and then he eventually gets to Camp Half-Blood, which is a magical summer camp that houses the protection for all of the demigod children. And then it gets found out that he's the son of Poseidon, and everyone kind of hates him for that a little bit because, like, oh, like, you're now, like, a walking celeb. You're better than all of us, and we've been here for years, and you just got here yesterday. So he makes a couple of friends, and him and those friends then do a cross-country road trip to get to the entrance to the underworld, which is in L.A., because of course it is. And through that whole journey, he has friends and allies, but he still doesn't know who pinned the theft of who stole Zeus's lightning bolt. And there's oh, Hades is doing it, and he's just trying to cover up Hades, like, oh, like, I'm gonna kill the guy who stole your lightning bolt and be the favorite brother, or maybe Zeus did it, and maybe Zeus just wants his brother's kids dead as well, but he's gonna be way more covert about it because he's the king of the gods and can't look bad. Maybe it's a monster. Maybe it's maybe it's just like there's a whole bunch of things. And Percy is told there's this prophecy about a child of the big 3, so maybe it's the entity mentioned in the prophecy, this creature called Kronos, the father of the Olympians, who is like the titan of time, who is this nasty beast who swallowed his children when they were born and had to be hacked into pieces and put to sleep for all eternity. And he's like, who is it? I want to know who it is. And he gets, and you have these allies that he makes across the way. He has some people that likes him back his camp, one of which is the camp counselor for the Hermes cabin. And Hermes, because he is the most adulterizing of the Greek gods, has the largest cabin full of kids. Because he's also the god of travel, so the joke is the traveling salesman. But there's like 30 kids in the Hermes cabin, and the counselor there, Luke Castellan, has a policy where he's like, I'll take in kids who don't know who their parents are yet, because we're the traveling god. We're like, we give houses to those who are on their journey to find out who they are. And he gives them magic items to help him on his way. He radios in and makes sure they're okay every once in a while. And then we get to the final act, and Percy gets all the way to the underworld, realizes that the lightning bolt has been planted on him the entire time and didn't even realize it. It was hidden in a magical compartment in his backpack that was given to him by Luke. Okay, that's weird. That's an odd coincidence. Well, maybe that's just a weird thing. We'll talk about it with Luke when we get back out. Okay, that's fine. So we're gonna leave. So how we're gonna get out? Oh, I've got these flying shoes that are supposed to fly me out of the underworld that was given to me by Luke. That's not gonna fail. So he starts to fly out of the underworld with his friends, and the shoes drag him further. They start pulling him towards the endless pit in the underworld. The shoes given to him by Luke. That's weird. Okay, that's weird. We're gonna ignore that. They finally get out of the underworld. They get back to Camp Half-Blood, and everything's kind of okay. And they talk to the gods at one point, and like Percy's accepted as like, all right, yeah, you're allowed to live, kid. And then finally he meets his dad, and it's really lovey-dovey. But then there's a chapter after that, and it's like, hey, Luke, while we're out here in the woods alone, can I ask you about the backpack and the shoes and all that? And Luke's like, oh yeah, you can totally ask me about that because I absolutely gave those things to you on purpose. And he's like, what? He's like, yeah, I stole the lightning bolt. Like, what? He's like, yeah, I stole the lightning bolt from Zeus. I snuck in with an invisibility cloak, a la Harry Potter style, and then I put it in that backpack and then I gave it to you. And he's like, excuse me, what? Why? Who? What? Where? When? I was like, oh, the reason I did it is because I'm actually the the guy who's campaigning to bring Cronus back. Wait, what? But here's the thing. You go back and you reread the book and you notice that there are odd comments that Luke makes. And there's weird coincidences about the items he gives him. And the weird times when he calls in where things happen, Luke's been orchestrating it the entire time. Every monster sent his way was something that Luke did. Luke has been the cause of terror for the entire movie. And he's the nice camp counselor the entire time. And you're terrified of this guy. And then he becomes the antagonist and villain for the rest of the season. Rest of the book series, and it's great. And he's working for the big bad, but he's this fantastic secondary villain that is the face that haunts Percy's dreams. And the reveal of when he almost kills Percy in the woods and has to be saved, and Luke gets chased off, is terrifying. Because imagine if the nice camp counselor that you've like made friends with that helped save your life just all of a sudden like tried to murder you with scorpion venom in the back of the woods. Like that's some Friday the 13th shit. Like, it's my favorite twist villain reveal ever because when you go back and read the book, you see all the stuff that Luke did through that lens, and it's amazing. It's flawless. So I wanted to geek out about that. What is your favorite twist villain, Matt?
Major spoilers for the movie I'm about to talk about. So way back when So there's a movie. It came out in 1995. It's called The Usual Suspects.
Okay, I see where you're going.
And it contains the greatest twist, not just villain twist. In my opinion, it is arguably one of the greatest plot twists in the history of film. And it happens in literally the last 2 minutes of the movie. Basically, the entire film is framed around this one lone survivor from this insane shootout where a bunch of criminals got killed and a bunch of authority got killed, and there's only one guy left. And even though he's a scumbag and he's technically a criminal, our main protagonist-esque kind of the movie, played by Chaz Palminteri, the entire movie is framed around him interrogating this person named Verbal, played by Kevin Spacey. And it's him retelling the entire story of the movie. And how it all led up to this. And how it all led up to him being the only one left. And they're trying to figure out who was the mastermind that set this whole thing up. Who was the mastermind that was like, I'm named the mysterious Kaiser Soze. Who was the one who orchestrated this entire attack to get all of these people killed. And to escape with all of these treasures. Well, throughout telling this story, Verbal is able to convince the detective of his innocence. And the detective lets him walk. And the movie you think is over when you see Verbal leave the police station and gather up his gold watch and his gold cigarette lighter and leave the police station and start walking down the street. Keep in mind, this is also a cripple character. He has a bad leg. He is handicapped. He's walking down the street with his handicapped leg. And all of a sudden, Chaz Palminteri's character looks behind him as he has this billboard full of all these posters and all of these things from previous cases and all this stuff. And he starts to realize that the story that Verbal told him, all of these details and all these fine, pristine things that he told them are on this wall. He sees names of characters that he made up. He sees locations that he brought up. His whole story is on his back wall. He's like, what? And then there's major character in the movie that you think is a major character named Kobayashi, who is like one of their informants. You notice that's the name of the brand that made the mug that the detective has been drinking out of the entire time. And the detective's like, oh my god, he made it up. He's Kaiser Soze. He runs out of the police station. You cut to Verbal walking down the street, and you slowly see his crippled legs start to just become normal again. And he gets in a car, and he drives away. And you're like, oh my god. And then the movie's over! And you're like, what? Like, and then you immediately have to go watch it again. Because it's one of those movies where it just leaves you like, wait, so, huh? And the last, like, 5 minutes of that movie are filmmaking genius, I personally think. And it is one of those movies where, honestly, the first hour and a half, it's a very short movie, it's like an hour 45 minutes. The first, like, hour and a half of the movie is a very engaging crime thriller. It's very good. It's very well written. Not really any complaints I have. It's a very solid movie. But those last 10 minutes turn a very solid movie into one of my favorites in the genre. And one of my favorite twists of all time. I think it's safe to say. It really is. I love The Usual Suspects. It's a great movie. And another great villain, also played by Kevin Spacey, that I hate to talk about because obviously Kevin Spacey's a scumbag. But the villain in... It's not a twist villain, but I also just want to bring this up. John Doe in Seven. Another great villain with another great introduction scene, and you only meet him in the last 20 minutes of the movie, which is also very against formula, because the whole movie the two detectives are looking for this bad guy, and then all of a sudden here he is in the police station willingly turning himself in, and you're like, what is going on right now? But then you realize he has this whole plan in mind, and it's just genius.
I love it.
But yeah, that's my favorite twist villain of all time.
Well, I will ask you, because like we're starting to get into that long period of the episode. I'll ask you this before we like maybe start to wrap up some ideas and advertise some future projects. What are like one or two from different places? What are one or two of your favorite villains? They don't have to be
of all time.
They don't have to be like these grandiose villains. They don't have to be. They don't even have to be good villains. But I want to ask you, what are like two or three of your favorite villains you like to see in action? They can be from anywhere. They can be any source. They don't even have to be good. I just am curious, what are a couple of your favorite villains to like go up against in a video game, or see on TV, or see on a movie, or read in a book? What are some of your favorite villains?
Well, I mean, if we're going off of like, fun villains, there's a lot of fun villains in cartoons that I always really enjoy seeing.
Absolutely.
Like, Plankton, or like Mr. Crocker and Fairly Odd Parents, or stuff like that.
Mr. Crocker. That's a good pick.
They're funny. I enjoy seeing them. I also do, in terms of funny villains, I really do like Dark Helmet from Spaceballs. That's another really good one. But in terms of like my favorite villain, like of all time, I think it's got to be the one that we surprisingly have not even brought up in this episode yet.
Go ahead.
We have not mentioned this person's name. We mentioned the franchise he's from, but we haven't mentioned his name. Because another thing I love about villains is when not only do you think they're right, but when they know they're right. They think they're the good guy of their story. And they're like, I am right. And these people are wrong. And I'm going to do whatever it takes.
When the villain is not even a villain in their eyes.
Yeah. And of course, that's the big boy, Thanos.
Oh,
I honestly think he might be my favorite because Infinity War is my favorite MCU movie, and half of that reason is because of Thanos. It's kind of surprising how little character development they gave him before that movie. He really had a brief cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy, one quick look at the post-credit scene of the Avengers, one line in the post-credit scene of Age of Ultron. Other than that, we never saw him until this movie. And yet they made him so compelling and so good. That movie should really just be called Thanos Infinity War, because it is his movie.
Yeah.
They showed the statistics. He has like 10 minutes of screen time more than any other character in that film, because they really needed to sell that this guy is something to deal with and he's something serious. And that's why I love Thanos. But like in terms of other villains, besides Thanos, obviously the Joker is up there, and obviously Vader's also up there.
Is GLaDOS your
GLaDOS is my favorite video game villain. And another villain I also really like, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but another kind of villain I like is when they're the protagonist.
Yeah. You're seeing it from the point of view.
And you're seeing it from the point of view. So I also really like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. Because Christian Bale's performance is so charismatic in that movie that I just can't help but smile whenever he's just killing people. It's kind of sadistic, but I like those. I'm not a big video game or book person, so I apologize for all the people that like those mediums because most of my examples today have been from movies and television. But those are my picks.
Not bad.
If I had to pick a favorite villain of all time, it's probably either Heath Ledger's Joker or Thanos. They're probably 1 and 2.
So it's not the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park.
Well, that's another great villain scene. That's my favorite scene in film, the T-Rex breakout. Yeah. I would argue that arguably is my favorite scene.
The dinosaurs. Okay,
they're not
a villain though.
They're an antagonistic force.
They're part antagonistic force, but I'm going to say they're the same in the Jaws. Like the Jaws.
They're Jaws.
They're the plot device.
Anyone says the shark is their. Oh, and also Hannibal Lecter. We also haven't brought up yet either.
Well, that's a whole other genre of horror. Like
yeah.
I'll ask you this: Who do you think is the greatest horror villain of all time?
Ooh, that's a very.
Because I have my opinions. I have my opinions on who the greatest horror villain is.
I would hope you did. Horror villain of all time.
It has to be a horror movie. It has to be like this was marketed to be a scary
movie. Would you
movie.
count Jack Torrance from The Shining as a villain?
I would count Jack Torrance as The Shining from a villain.
Because that's my favorite.
That's actually a good.
That's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Is it Jack Torrance or is it Jack Torrance's is it Jack Torrance's villain?
In terms of
or is it the corruption that's pushed him to be
exactly. In terms of like stereotypical horror villains, though, I am a big fan of Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs, although I don't consider that really a horror movie. It's more of just a suspense thriller.
Fair.
I'd
count it more of a horror movie just because it has like the.
Well, if you're counting it as a horror movie, then Hannibal Lecter. But like, there's obviously.
But if you don't, then I want to know what you consider as a horror movie and what you consider as the greatest horror movie.
I would say Freddy Krueger personally from the original Nightmare on Elm Street.
the OG.
Because he's horrifying. And that's what a great villain should be in that movie. He is able to control your thoughts when you're asleep. You have no defense against him. He's terrifying.
I will go on record on saying that like I never was a horror movie fan several years ago. Like I was a kid, I was a scaredy cat when it came to that thing. In the recent years, I've become much more of a someone who likes horror movies. It's been a slow build, but I do like them now. And I've, of course, going to bat and saying that I like horror movies, I'm now well educated in horror movies. I will admit this though, I like older horror movies versus newer horror movies.
Are you saying Norman Bates or something?
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. But I will say this just like before I give my answer. Even though I will happily sit down and watch like an old series like Friday the 13th or something like that over anything new, because I feel like new horror movies just rely on jump scares, which I just hate jump scares as a tactic. Because like that's just I'm gonna like throw my heart up for a second and then we're gonna go back to a boring movie.
Yeah.
Like, but old movies knew how to do terror right, and I like terror more than horror. I like psychological stuff. I like otherworldly stuff. But I will say this: the Nightmare on Elm Street series is the only what I consider old age horror film series that I still cannot watch to this day.
They're horrifying.
I don't like them.
They really are.
And here's the problem: is because I'm an insomniac. Like, I can't even get to sleep on a normal basis. So I'm like, the one thing that I have to struggle to do, like in theoretically in that universe, I would just be dead. I'd be the opening kill of every single Friday the 13th movie because there's no way you're getting me up. Because I take forever to get to sleep, and then I take forever to wake up. So I'm just dead in the first 5 minutes of every single one of those movies. And the fact that there is that psychological thrill, like he's like in your dreams, I'm terrified of that concept. I don't like that concept at all.
Yeah.
So I physically cannot watch those movies. I appreciate what they do. I like the idea of Freddy Krueger. I don't want to sit through those movies.
I also want to give a quick shout out to all the monster characters that don't have any lines, such as the Predator and the Xenomorph.
Yeah.
They also deserve some recognition because they're horrifying.
I will stand on your opposition.
And Norman Bates is also a really good one.
I will stand on your opposition on the horror movie aspect. I think that there is no greater horror movie icon than Jason Voorhees.
I thought you were going to say Michael Myers.
No, I think Michael Myers is nowhere near the level of Jason. I think that Michael Myers is essentially just like, Jason works out really. I'm not even kidding. Like, if you've ever watched the behind the scenes reel of like how they made the first Halloween, quite literally one of the first things ever said by anyone on that like behind the scenes reel is when they were making the movie, they flat out said, like, the producers came to them and said, hey, have you seen Friday the 13th? Do something like that, but for our studio. So if Jason was not there to swing the machete first, we would never see Michael Myers. I just look at Michael Myers as a cheap knockoff of Jason. I think that Jason is the quintessential horror icon. And which is also tacky in itself to say, because Jason's technically not even Jason until the second movie. And he's not the unstoppable, like, immortal Jason Voorhees until the 6th movie. Because there are 10 of them. So Jason's a very paradoxical answer for that. But I will go first.
Okay, so what is so in terms of your favorite villains?
My favorite villains.
Because I gave you my answers.
I'm going to go a little bit all over the map. I'm going to try and choose one from each medium that I enjoy the most.
For the sake of canon, though, my answers are Heath Ledger's Joker and Thanos. Just to clear up them. I
think out of movies, like film, like I'm talking like silver screen film, my favorite movie villain, I'm gonna double down on Davy Jones.
That's a good pick.
I think that Davy Jones is the perfect human element themed villain. He is a phenomenal character. He's a phenomenally well-rounded character, and you could feasibly imagine that for that time period, anyone could have become Davy Jones. Mm-hmm. It just didn't have to be him.
Yeah,
he is simultaneously the most inhuman villain and the most human villain of all of, at least in cinema. To me, in movies, I love his character arc. I love his lines. I love his message. I think it's a really, really fitting. I think he's a force of nature too. He's terrifying. There's no need for him to be as scary and intense as he is in those movies, because when your protagonist is Jack Sparrow, like, we're not looking for a nightmare fueled villain, but we get one, and it's the best part of those movies.
Oh yeah.
But my favorite cinema villain is a great example. My favorite. I'm going to get flack for this. I'm definitely going to get bullied by Connor for this.
Are you going to say Xehanort?
My favorite villain from video games could go to a lot of contenders, because I've played so many video games. Like, a lot of video games.
Is your favorite villain the other players in Destiny?
No, that's although probably they could win second place. No, they could win third place. My favorite villain from video game history...
Just say it.
...is... It's a tie for video games. It's a tie for me between Riku from Kingdom Hearts and Dr. Edward Richtofen from the zombie storyline from Call of Duty.
Wait, I thought Xehanort was the villain.
No. Here's the thing. Xehanort... Okay, I'm going to go on.
Oh, God.
Give me the mic.
All right, here we go.
It's finally happened.
It's history being made.
It's not history. It's just me being angry.
Sean is going to talk about Kingdom Hearts.
You got me. For those of you in the audience. So first off, I just want to give a disclaimer. Kingdom Hearts is a wonderful, beautiful, hot mess of a video game series that's 20 years old. It is a garbage heap of the strangest mashup of themes, but I love it anyways. I've played it since I was like I've played it since I was 5 years old. It was one of the first video games that I picked up and did by myself. Which a 5-year-old Sean can beat Kingdom Hearts 1 with very little help. I don't know if that's good or bad. But here's the problem. So I'm going to start with Riku, and then I'll move to Edward Richtofen. They're both the strangest picks. And, like, why would I say these over everything else? I know Bowser and Ganondorf and GLaDOS.
Bowser's just like...
Like, they're iconic villains. They're great. I love that. I love King Dedede out of the Kirby series. I think King Dedede is a great villain. Don't at me. But, like... I'm going to choose those two because they're a very thematic of, like, what I think is A, one of the best parts of early Kingdom Hearts, and B, a character that I find fascinating by itself. So with Riku, Riku is your rival actually in your journey as Sora in Kingdom Hearts 1, and Sora and Riku are best friends. They're trapped on an island together with a couple of other kids, but they're not really important until later games. Sora and Riku dream of going out into the world and seeing all the different places they can see, and Riku is the stereotypical, I know I'm the best kid on the island. He's the best at swordplay. He's the best at getting survival materials. He's the smartest person there. He's the cool guy. And Sora is essentially the sidekick. Is like, I want to be Riku when I grow up, essentially. And then Sora is chosen by the Keyblade, and he's told that he's the guy in the prophecy that's probably going to like stop the door to Kingdom Hearts being open, the world falling to darkness, whatever. Riku and Sora, Sora finds out after the island is destroyed. And Riku survives the island. He's looking for Sora in where they wash up, a place called Traverse Town. Sora figures out that he's the chosen one. Riku gets shafted, essentially. He's like, oh shit, Sora has all these new friends that are heralding him as the chosen one when I could kick his ass 7 ways from Sunday in a sword fighting contest. And now he's blessed with ultimate light-based power. what the hell, man? Like, he's just left out in the cold. So who scoops him up? Maleficent, because I forgot to mention this is a Disney game. Yeah, Maleficent. You know, that Maleficent. Like, I'm talking green-skinned, early 1960s Maleficent. Scoops him up and says, I can imbue you with the power of darkness. When in reality, it's just basically him getting used by other villains. But the problem is Riku chooses it. Riku chooses to get manipulated by other villains. He chooses to accept the power of darkness. He chooses to stand in front of his once best friend because he thinks he was left out in the cold. Riku's whole motivation in the first game, until he gets full-on possessed and then he has to be saved, the brief time that Riku is working of his own autonomy is out of heartbreak because his best friend left him behind. Or at least what he thought was his best friend leaving him behind. Because Sora didn't mean to leave Riku behind. He just couldn't find him. He was like, damn it, Riku's gone. I gotta go find Riku and Kairi, my best friends. Riku was lied to and was basically told, oh yeah, he's got new friends now. He doesn't need you anymore. You want to come join the Darkness Club? We got cookies. Like, that's pretty much what Maleficent said to him. And then Maleficent get used, and then Riku gets possessed by by that game's big bad. But that doesn't matter. For a brief window of time, Riku said, yeah, I'm gonna choose to go to the dark side because I think that my best friend left me. And Riku is still affected by that 20 years later and 10 games later. When he gets a redemption arc, and he goes so far into going to be the greatest hero in the series. But in the first game, he's the villain. And his arc in that game, granted, the writing for those games, the dialogue is a little painful, and the writing is not that great. But what they tried to do and what they clean up in later installments really makes this out to be a character that I think is one of the best in the franchise. And he's one of the best villains when he's temporarily a villain. On the flip side, I'm going to go in a complete opposite direction.
And now for something completely different.
So yeah, for something completely different. Yes, I played Call of Duty a lot back in the day. I never played multiplayer, though, because I hate multiplayer Call of Duty with a burning passion. I played with a couple of friends in middle school and high school, and we became experts at the Call of Duty Zombies storyline that was in the Black Ops games. And I don't know if anyone knew this, but there's a storyline. There was a storyline that happened in between every DLC installment for the Zombies maps that they released since Black Ops 1, and they carried it all the way through Black Ops 4, and it was the same storyline. And the antagonist, villain / eventual protagonist was a Nazi scientist called Edward Richtofen. And yes, I said protagonist. Yes, I also said Nazi in the same sentence. Don't worry, he gets better. But he's the guy who, along with his scientist mentor, they figured out how to use undead weaponry and raise the dead for the Nazis back in World War II. And then he got corrupted by that same material and he lost his mind. And then there's this whole epic story arc of where, oh, guess what? The material that raised the dead was actually, interdimensional goo that essentially, leads to an eventual fight with Lovecraftian horrors at the end of the storyline. But he's a phenomenal character because he loses his mind and becomes a villain hell-bent on just becoming basically king of the zombies in the first couple of installments throughout the scattered DLC packages. And then he ends up losing in the first half. He loses a villain, which most villains should lose. But he loses and is trapped within a singular zombified body, his consciousness. And then he fights and worms his way into then once again becoming the hive mind to control the undead in one timeline. Because there's eventually time travel. Don't at me. It was a weird storyline. But it was good because it was I like dumb Rubik's Cube puzzles of storylines.
Sure.
And that's one of them. But Edward Richtofen in another timeline sees all this happen. He is the same one. He's destined to go on the same path. But he chooses the other option. He chooses to preserve and try and work against an evil version of himself. So it's now a matter of the same person faced with what they could have become. So the villainous version of him thinks that the good version is a fool for not seizing this power to becoming an all-powerful being when they were shunned and they were viewed as the sidekick. Whereas the good version is why would you choose to destroy everything and all the people you cared about and your best friend and mentor? Yes, I get it, you lost your mind, but you got it back eventually and you still decided to continue on this path. So it was a study of is it a choice to be evil in these two characters. And I know I'm attaching way too much significance to a Call of Duty storyline.
Yeah.
But that's the point. I like that kind of dumb shit. As far as books go, honestly, I've read just as many books. Luke Castellan is up there. Any villain out of the Dresden Files is up there. I've read a lot of book series. I like.
If you had to, but what's your favorite?
My favorite book villain.
No favorite of all time. I named mine.
My favorite book villain is also a very niche pick, and it's a book series that you need to finish reading.
Oh.
It's Sir Joe. It's God, I can't even speak today. It's Greg from The Enemy. The Enemy is an old series that was a Scholastic book series, which basically was teetered on like the higher end of the Scholastic book series, for age wise, and it's a zombie apocalypse story, and it's a character that is a zombie. I'm picking a literal zombie out of all the literary titans that I could have chosen.
Who's your favorite villain of all time?
I think he's one of my favorite book villains of all time. Villain. He's nowhere near favorite villain of all time, but he's one of my favorite book villains of all time, and I want to talk about him because he's fascinating. Because the horrific thing about that series is that it's a zombie apocalypse. It's set in London, but here's the catch. Only people who were 16 years and older got the disease. So the world is left to kids. So the horrific thing is there's this character you meet in the flashback book where they become, like, you see, like, oh, they're like one of the last adults around. They're a great character. They're this kind, fatherly figure to these kids. And then he gets infected. And then he becomes the most powerful hive mind zombie, because it's a hive mind kind of zombie infection, which is the worst, the most terrifying kind. And they keep, and the infected keep semblances of their own memories, which is another horrific concept, right? Like, imagine being a zombie and you have some vague ideas of who you were and that you weren't always like this, and every once in a while it becomes really clear to you. But then it just immediately fades into the recesses of your ruined synapses.
That's horrifying.
This character knows that he was a human at one time, but he knows what he is now. He thinks what he is now is so much better. He's the worst kind of zombie. He's an intelligent zombie. And he gets this hive mind together to just assault London in probably one of the most organized zombie attacks I've ever seen in all of fiction. And I love zombie stories. So it was incredible to see this kind of villain emerge out of a book. A sentient zombie that wanted to take over London. So I think it's a fascinating read. And Matt started reading the book series, and he needs to finish the first book.
Okay,
But that's my favorite out of books. What have I said? I've said movie, book, video game.
Yeah, so what's your favorite of all time? Because I said mine.
Oh, God. I have to pick one.
Is it Davy Jones?
I don't know if it's Davy Jones. Actually, it might be Davy Jones. I think I'm going to double down. I'm going to say Davy Jones is probably my favorite villain of all time. I also want to give an honorable mention to two things, just before we have our closing statements.
Okay.
Honorable mention, I play Magic the Gathering, which is...
Damn it!
Magic has a storyline.
All right, mark it down. Hour 56:40. That was the time it took for Sean to bring up Magic the Gathering.
Okay. Very, very short statement, but like Magic the Gathering is a wonderful card game. I love it. I've played it for years with a group of great friends. Magic actually has a storyline. Every set of cards is released as another chapter in that ever expanding story, and they have a wonderful villain that was Thanos level for them, a dragon that became a god called Nicol Bolas, and they're this fantastic schemer of a being, which basically is Thanos. He went about the multiverse collecting the most powerful pieces of magic artifacts and recruiting the most powerful mages in existence to help him destroy most of the multiverse in an effort to become an all-powerful immortal god that could control whatever he didn't destroy. And he's very simple on paper, but the level of scheming he went through to get through, which I could do a whole series on, is incredible. And I just love that villain so much. So I want to give Nicol Bolas a shout out there. And the other is I play D&D a lot.
There it is.
I'm just running the full gauntlet. This is my show now.
My lord.
I've played in several different great campaigns, and I want to shout out a couple of the great villains there. I played in Connor's campaign for a while. I didn't play in Connor. I guest starred in Connor's campaign, and he wrote a wonderful story about how the God of Death, who was in charge in his campaign setting, his God of Death was responsible for making the human race, and then every major conflict in that world's history was the result of the human race, not the other fantasy races. So the God of Death stepped up and said, "This was my mistake. The world is suffering because of my creation. I'm going to purge the world of humankind, so that the rest of the races will never have conflict again." Which he thought he was right. He thought he was... And this is a very, very condensed retelling of that. So when Connor eventually listens to it, I'm sorry I couldn't go on a whole, rant about Celestar. But Celestar, the god of death,
believe me, it's quite all right.
he believed that he was right. He believed that he was doing the world a service by eradicating the human race and anyone who stood with them. So he believed he was right. He was a villain, thought he was right. Colleen, Connor's girlfriend, who Colleen, we're finally going to have on the show soon. Colleen told a story in her D&D campaign about a survivor on an attack who was a half-elf. Which in her world, half elves were like viewed as like bastard races, so like they weren't fit to live. They were like genetic Mongols essentially, and he survived an attack on a half elf settlement and vowed that he would bring the same level of total destruction of his world to the rest of the world itself. And he was a doomsday style villain. He didn't care if he lived or died. He just wanted the world to pay, and he was scary because of that, because he was willing to do anything to further his goal. So he was a wonderful hellbent style villain that was no longer man. He was just the concept of destruction, going so far back as to call upon old ancient gods to destroy the universe. So those are two phenomenal villains that I have had the privilege of helping fight and being a rival to in two different fantastic campaigns. And I've seen a host of other great villains, and I've designed villains myself, but those two I believe deserve shout-outs.
And there you have it. Well, that concludes our revival episode of the Everything is Fine podcast.
Yeah, we also think we're going to go a little bit longer with them because people said they were okay with this length.
Yes.
So
and
that's why we didn't shut up 30 minutes ago.
And before we go, as we now cross the 2 hour threshold, before we leave, we want to quickly tease what is to be expected on social media this week. Because obviously there was no bloodbath. So you're probably
no rankings.
So you're probably wondering, well, then what on earth are they going to do? Well, we're trying something new. We have compiled a list of around...
A glist?
A glist? We have compiled a list of about 16 of our favorite villains / some of the most iconic villains of all time. And we have put them into a bracket for you to decide the winner of. So each day, starting on Monday, the Monday after this episode comes out, we'll be releasing the matchups round by round. It will take, I guess, 4 days because there'll be 4 total rounds of voting. And based off of y'all's responses, we will crown the Everything is Fine listener audience's favorite villain of all time. We've devised matchups based off of theme. So we have...
It's not who would win in a fight. We're going to stress that very clearly.
No, it is absolutely not
because there
who
are
would win in
some
a fight.
matches where like one of the contenders would absolutely pummel the other.
There is the theme of it is the best villain of all time. Who is your favorite and who deserves to be crowned as the GOAT? The greatest of all time.
I can't stand
that.
phrase.
Will be what we're doing on Instagram this week. And we'll be posting polls every day starting on Monday. And we will then go process of elimination, one by one, March Madness-esque style. And we'll crown, in your opinion, the best villain of all time. And once again, we've devised matchups that each have a similar theme. So you'll be seeing video game villains in the same matchup. You'll be seeing sci-fi villains in the same matchup. Horror villains in the same matchup. Disney villains in the same matchup. And it's going to go...
And some cult classic films as well.
Yes.
Like beloved film canon. So
we're very much so looking forward to that. We hope you are as well. Please stay on social media and in the loop with that, because that will be starting the Monday after this episode comes out, which I believe is the 13th.
Sure. Yeah,
it's Monday the 13th. So that's what we're doing. So that is what we have in store for you. But we thank you once again for listening. If you made it all the way through, we love you.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Thank you for listening to us and letting us do this, because it's a lot of fun. Sean and I have a good time. And if you have any ideas for any future episodes we could do,
bother us.
We're going to be posting on Instagram a question and answer box of some of your suggestions, and we're going to want to hear directly from you.
Just text the show account at this point. Just do it.
Or if you happen to be friends with Sean and I outside of the current show,
bother us.
Just come
wave at us on the street.
Yeah.
Hunt us down. Knock on our doors. We want to do stuff that you guys want to hear.
Yeah.
So if it's crazy or not, suggest it to us. We might pick it up. We have a lot of great things coming up, but we're more than happy to include, like, if enough people come to us and say, hey, we really want you to do, like, this topic or this idea, or what do you think of this? We'll do it.
Yep.
So, yeah, we've got some great things in the wings for, like, stuff we do have established. We have some wonderful collaborations we want to get done. The holidays are coming up, both Christmas and
Expect
Halloween.
some mega Halloween and Christmas specials coming your way.
So, yeah, we have some great things we want to do for you guys. We have guests that we're going to bring back, but we're also going to try and fly solo a bit more, because we also, like, we want, not that we don't love our guests. We do. We love them. We want them to all come back. But we also have some ideas that we know we're just going to have to bounce off each other for. So we want to fly solo and bring that to the table as well.
But again, we thank you all for listening. We are appreciative to be back. And just remember, no matter how crazy life gets, everything is fine.